Thanks again, everyone, for coming out. My name is Emma Crow-Willard, and I am the managing producer and editorial director at Climate Now. We are a multimedia educational resource, and we do events, and we create videos, explainer videos, and we have a podcast where we talk to experts in all different climate solutions. And so doing events is one of the things that we do to try to make sure to engage communities around climate solutions that are applicable for their region. And so that's part of what this event is. And we put this event together with a planning group here. And so I'm going to have Mike Likes come up here. Hopefully I didn't mispronounce your name. Okay, so sorry. From Commissioner Adrian Garcia's office, they were a part of the planning group. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Carbon Management Workshop organized by Climate Now and sponsored by the Department of Energy. Today's workshop agenda reflects many months of work and discussion of a community planning group, which Commissioner Garcia himself has been pleased to be a part of. I'd also like to thank some of the other local groups that have been a part of this too, and instrumental in making something like this happen. Mary Jane Mudd with the East Harris County Manufacturers Association, some of our local advocacy groups such as Air Alliance I know is here. They've also played important roles in this as well. So thank you all. In addition to Commissioner Garcia's office, the planning group included stakeholders from local and state universities, local chamber of commerce, industry, environmental NGOs, and labor. The results of those many months of conversations and varied perspectives is today's workshop agenda, designed to provide you with an introduction to carbon management, developing technologies, proposed projects, regulation, and public safety infrastructure. Today's conversation, understanding the new technology and benefits and the risk to our community, is an important conversation to have. I stress conversation because I encourage you to ask questions and engage. If you have any questions about today's workshop, feel free to reach out to Kristen Lee. Kristen, why don't you raise your hand? She's in Commissioner Garcia's office, and she's an excellent asset to our team, and she'll be glad to help out whenever she can. So thank you, welcome, and look forward to hearing a robust conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. I would like to now introduce our moderator for the evening, Emmanuel Taylor from Energetics.
Appreciate it. Wow. Thanks, y'all. That felt good. I don't usually get cheers. That's great. Well, good evening and welcome, everyone. I want to personally just extend a heartfelt thanks to everybody for making time to be here and to be a part of this important conversation. So I am the moderator for this evening, so I just want to give a heads up. I am not a member of any of the project teams for any of the projects that are being considered for the area. I'm not a member of the team with any of the federal agencies. My role here is independent. And part of my goal is to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to contribute to the discussion today. All right, we have a number of things to quickly discuss just to sort of set the scene before we jump into our agenda today. I wanted to start by just reviewing some of the intended purposes and outcomes for today's conversation. The first being an opportunity to learn more about carbon management technologies and different related pathways. But more importantly, an opportunity for everyone to voice questions related to any concerns or areas of interest or further inquiry related to carbon management and sort of what's happening in the region. So these could be questions for DOE or any of the other agencies or folks who are representing the technologies and the work that's being done in this area. This is also an opportunity to learn more about opportunities to engage with these projects and technologies and everything that has the potential to develop regarding carbon management in this region in the future. But this is also an opportunity for us to learn from one another as well. So not just the folks who are presenting today, but it's an opportunity to engage more broadly as a community. In order to do that well, we've suggested a number of key principles that we think are core to establishing an environment in which our discussions can be fruitful. The first of these being respect and seeing ourselves as a community of peers. So I'm going to ask that today, regardless of your background, your experience, what industry you work in, I just want to acknowledge that we all have expertise that's important in informing this discussion. That expertise may be in your lived experience in your community, right? That nobody knows better than you, right? Or it could be in an area of technology or practice that you've worked in, right? We all have something that we bring to this conversation, and everybody's perspective is valued, welcome, and important. And not just important, but critical to being able to move forward collectively to whatever future we all agree is most important. There are a few things that I think are important to acknowledge, and that's the last 3 points here. So number one, timeliness. We only have a little bit of time together for this particular conversation today, right? And so there is a great likelihood that many folks will still feel dissatisfied at the end of our discussion. And that's a natural limitation just because of the time that we have. And so that's one thing that we want to recognize. Today we'll be able to continue a conversation that's already started in this region, but there will still be more discussion that's needed even after this. Let's see. But follow-up is important. And as long as we're committed to continuing the conversation, then we can work through these things over time. Does that make sense? That sound good? Everybody comfortable with that? Any objections? Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so what are we going to be doing? We have some presentations that are planned. We do have Q&A sessions. There'll be a panel discussion as well. Many of you have been interacting with the exhibits. This will still happen again even after the planned agenda has finished. There'll be an opportunity for follow-up conversations and exchanging information and connecting with one another as well. A few ground rules before we jump in. To the extent possible, we want to keep our feedback constructive. And so I'm going to ask everybody to avoid things like derogatory comments or personal attacks and things like that. We're talking about some really important issues today, and we do want to continue to stay focused on those. Recognizing that we only have a little bit of time, I'm going to ask everybody to try to be concise as well. This also goes for our speakers. And so to that point, all of the presenters today, I'm going to be sitting right here in the front. I'll have my eyes on the time. When you have about 2 minutes left in your presentation, you may see me raise a hand to indicate that. When you have 1 minute left, I will put one finger up. If your time is up, I will stand up. To the extent possible, we want to try to keep all of the presentations on schedule because we don't want to sacrifice any of the discussion time for the sake of presentations running over. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you, everyone. And otherwise, we also acknowledge not everybody knows everything, and we're here to learn from each other, so please feel free to ask questions. There are note cards on the table. If you have a question, you can write it down at any point in time. We want to make sure that folks don't forget their questions in the course of the discussion. And if you don't feel comfortable asking a question, you can always pass that card to folks who will be going around the room with microphones, and somebody can ask the question on your behalf as well. Okay, does that all sound good? All right. There are also some poster papers. Some folks have seen them. If you have other questions, you can ask them. It's just another way that we're collecting feedback. And we do encourage folks to exchange contact information to keep the conversations going even after the agenda ends today. All right. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. So we're going to be hearing first from Susan Havarka, who has many years of experience in actually testing wells for their injection characteristics and for their retention capabilities. And so she's going to be speaking from her experience in her research and her work and her career. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Okay, so I'm asked to do some ground setting for the 101 of CCS as part of carbon management. Let me say a little bit of who I am. I'm a researcher, so I'm always asking questions. Some of the questions you guys have about CCS, with luck, maybe there's some of the questions that we've been having in my research team, and we might have some answers for you. So I love questions. I love your questions. I may sound like a advocate for CCS, but it's because I've asked myself so many questions over so many years. I started working in the 90s. I did the U.S.'s first deep saline formation study in Dayton, and in 2004. And so I feel like I have a lot of information to share, but I have to keep the time. So what to do about, this is one slide to set the stage for what we're doing here. What to do about CO2. This is a graph of the annual emissions globally of how much CO2 over time. You notice that every year, except for the little blip when we had COVID, we've emitted more CO2. And if we think about number of people increasing in the world and the number of us using cell phones and needing computers and advanced energy intensive, if nothing changes about how we manage carbon, it will keep going up. So people who do climate modeling say that in order to avoid dangerous increases in temperature, if we want to increase the temperature only 2 degrees Celsius, so that's how much, almost 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. We want to keep the temperature from increasing so much. We need to reduce the amount of CO2 we emit to the atmosphere by the blue line, or if we want a safer amount, which is 1.5 degree increase. That's hotter than now, more storms, more everything than now. That's the best we can do. We need to do something. So the list of somethings is really long, and I'm not an expert on it. I'm just going to give you a teaser about what some kind of things people are discussing. Some examples, and they're just examples. Efficiency is a very favored. How many people are in favor of efficiency? I am seriously in favor of efficiency. It's a brilliant thing to do. We can't efficiency enough to get rid of all of it. Solar is an awesome solution. I have solar on my house. I love it. I love it. Wind works well, not especially from this Houston area, offshore wind or parts of West Texas. Batteries are great to give wind and solar gap fill. Electrification, this all goes together. Many of these things are used together with one thing. Hydrogen fuel. How many of you heard about hydrogen as a fuel option? It's a hot button issue here in this area. Considerable federal investment in looking into hydrogen as a potential non-greenhouse emitting fuel. Lots of other types of fuels, like I can't even begin to talk about biofuels. One thing you convert to another thing, many clever ideas, all important. Carbon capture and storage is the one we're going to talk about here, and there are many other options. So why am I going to talk about carbon capture and storage? Not just because I work on it, that would be vanity, but because it's coming here. So many industries are interested in it here. Why here? Because we have the combination, and along the whole Gulf Coast from New Orleans to Kingsville, we have the opportunity of lots and lots of carbon intensive industries that have a major issue of what they're going to do to mitigate the carbon emissions. And we have the subsurface geology that's both well known and very suitable for storage. I'll tell you some more about that so you see what we mean. It's an opportunity that's available here that's not available in many parts of the world or many parts of the US. You may think it's an annoying, but it's also a competitive advantage, so you guys will have to weigh those things. So what is carbon capture? So I'm not going to talk about the rest of those things, even though I honor them and respect them. I'm just going to tell you about this new thing that not too many people know about, all right? You forgive me? All right. CO2 is emitted and it spreads everywhere. So what we do here spreads to Minnesota. What they do in Minnesota spreads here. And we don't want to do that, so what do we do to stop it? One of the things we can do to stop it is to capture it and separate it from the other gases, because we don't want to inject air. And transport it, compress it and transport it. You can use a pipeline, you can use a ship, you can even use a truck, whatever you want. And inject it deep underground into rocks. And it has to be a selected site. You can't do it everywhere. That's one reason this is attractive, is because it's suitable. And it's got to be permitted. You'll hear from EPA about how this is permitting. It's the toughest permit that we've ever had to do with deep well injection. The CO2 is permanently stored, permanently. Beneath many layers of rock and between rock grains. Some people think of storage, they think about you're going to dig a cavern down there, or a mine, and you're going to fill it up and it'll balloon, and no, it's between the rock grains themselves. If you need more, we'll invite you over to look at rock grains and see the things stored between them. So how can we be sure it will stay underground? We put it down, we put it under pressure, it's buoyant, it will come up if it could. How do we know it's not going to come up? Because it won't do any good, it might be hazardous, we want it down. So it's deep under many layers of rock. So the many layers is a many-layered system that will prevent it from coming up. It might break through one layer, but it can't break through the whole stack. It's so many barriers, multi-barrier. The rocks here come in multi-barrier layers. At great depth, if you want to know the depth, I'll unfold a log and wave it to you. Don't have time at the moment, but I'll show you how deep it is. Impress you. It's really deep. It's a mile deep. It's a long way. How far is a mile from here? Straight down? It's a long way down. And it's between the sand grains. So it gets stuck. How does it get stuck? It's a very important kind of physics we don't learn about in high school, but you perhaps experienced it. Something that's porous has tiny spaces. If you think about your clothes, they're the porous material you mostly know. The holes in your shirt, right? You can blow through it. Little holes. That size holes are the holes that are between the sand grains. If you spill something on your shirt, can you wipe it off? If I spill it on the table, I can wipe it off. That's not a porous medium. If I spill it on my shirt, it goes in, and I'll have to take it to the laundromat. So the security of storage is based on your experience with laundry, porous media. Something that goes in won't come out unless you really try hard to get it out. It's not going to out all of a sudden. Whoa, this is a touchy button. I did my whole talk so fast. I don't know why it did that for us. Okay, preview. All right. The other thing is we're going to hear from the regulators about how they oversee to make sure that the rules that make sure that the site is correct and the site is being managed correctly, and all the facilities are going to keep the CO2 where they are. I'll talk a little bit more about that if I don't run out of time. So it's a global technology. Is it done only here? No, it's been done since the first one was running in Norway since 1996. There are clusters of projects here. Let's zoom into right here. So these are projects near here. Most of the ship channel projects are capture projects. The little red dots are capture projects. The squares are storage projects, which I'm talking about here, where the CO2 will be put down. The green circles are emission sources. These are putting CO2 up, and they haven't announced what they're going to do with that CO2. Some of them may be in negotiation and haven't told anybody, but as far as we know, they're still emitting. So there's a bunch of unabated CO2 going up in the air here. It's not dealt with yet. There's a copy of the map over here if you want to take it with you. So common worries about CCS: will it cause earthquakes? Will it all come out of the ground all at once, like it did in a lake in Africa? The answer is no to both of these. Pretty firm no. The rocks here will accept the CO2 without breaking. So they will not have seismicity. That happens in Oklahoma, it happens in West Texas, it happened near Dallas for saltwater disposal. Here it will not happen. Why do we know? Because we've already been injecting very large amounts of fluid, and we know that the rocks here can take it. It's, I don't know, should we say Houston tough or something? These rocks, actually, because they will bend instead of breaking. So they're not real hard rocks. They don't when you hit them, they don't break, they slush. And this is good for accepting the CO2. And the CO2 won't come out. It's stuck between the pores. As I showed you, it can't out. It's not popping a balloon. It's getting out of your laundry. That's rate that comes out. So common worries about CO2 that you shouldn't worry about. Will pipelines blow up? We're going to hear about pipelines. CO2 doesn't catch on fire like methane gas. So some of the worst things you heard about pipelines can't happen here. But if pipelines are damaged, the CO2 can come out. It comes out energetically, you shouldn't stand in front of it. Shoots little dry ice particles, it's heavier than air, so it goes down on the ground. It's loud. It makes kind of a fog. I've waited around it, and I've released a lot more CO2. I'll tell you stories. It's a hazard, but not dramatically a terrible hazard for the most part. Lots of old wells near here where they leak. The operator must prove that the wells are properly constructed, managed, plugged before the injection can start. We've handled CO2 for more than 40 years. I myself have looked for many flawed wells, and I haven't personally found one. They're out there, but I personally have looked at now, 500 wells and not managed to find one yet. So it's not very common. Here's how they're constructed. You put a casing to separate out the fresh water. Then you put a long string in to go down to those depths, to the hydrocarbon target. You cement it in. You have to check the barriers when the well is being operated. At the end, you have to plug them. And what can go wrong? That's not constructed correctly. It was damaged. The records were lost. The well has to be re-entered and everything checked. If it's not cased to modern standards, cemented to modern standards, it won't do. So they may not be maintained, it could corrode. So if you're hosting a CCS project, a storage project near here, which you are, then you could ask the operator and the regulator what they've done about existing wells. So they should be able to inventory, tell you the total story on each one, and you can find out where they are, how they're being coped with, whether you're satisfied. So they have to be fixed. You could ask, find out. If you need more information, here's my contact. I'm delighted to tell you anything I know, which you paid for out of taxpayer money on DOE funding recently. So it's your information I have is yours for the asking.
And just a note, so there are some folks recording this session. We're going to try to use the mics as much as possible. It's the only way to pick up the audio. So thank you.
My question is on the casing, the lower casing, it says must be maintained. So if the well's plugged, how are you maintaining it?
Then you got to put the cement plug so that it can not be maintained. So after that, the steel will begin to disintegrate. So you have to put the plugs to separate out the sections of the hull.
Okay.
So, but when it's in operation, it has to be maintained. We have a number of wells that are discussed as orphans or out of compliance. In Texas, it's a real problem. U.S.-wide, it's a real problem. So they're a problem for the CCS projects. They all have to find them all and find the records and fix them. So it's a requirement, and it's the thing. Some people worry about things. If you're going to worry about something here, you should worry about the fixing on the wells. Is the place that we could have experience in the Gulf Coast. So
Thank you.
he's going to run the mic.
Related to that, if you have a field and you're putting something down a particular well, but you've got a field, is this going to spread to other wells?
Absolutely.
So you have to find everything in the field.
Yeah, you have to find what's called an area of review. You have to do a calculation and discover how many of the wells, what area. You have to provide evidence that no fluids will be transmitted to surface. It's part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. Every single injection class well has to do it. Class 6 has to do it. So they have to de-risk all of the wells, calculate the area that's impacted. It's called the area of review, and then you have to review all the wells in that area and solve them, which causes some of the projects here to move away from old infrastructure. So some places they talk about using depleted fields, putting CO2 back where it came from. But many of the projects here are moving away to get areas that are not penetrated by many wells as a better opportunity to have to fix very few wells.
Sorry. You had a question here? No, I'll get you next. And there was another.
I think those
If we
three
run
more
out of time,
questions.
I'm still here.
Okay, I'm
so
Really quickly, if you completely lost containment at the top of the well, let's say it just sheared off, could you estimate how much would flow up?
Yeah. There's a software that's provided by Lawrence Livermore National Lab called T2 Wells. My friend Kurt Oldenburg will send it to you. We have it in Austin. You can take a look. I have a student working on this exact question right now, and it will depend on the driving force, the depth, and the permeability, and the pressure, and and how long it's been flowing. Wells self-kill. So I had some wells that we didn't shear the well off, but we opened them up. We were doing a series of experiments to answer your question. And the answer was in that place in Mississippi, which was fairly like here, that they would run for about 6 hours, and then they'd kill themselves while they'd water out, which happens. Oil fields don't keep producing. They have to put a pump on them after a while. So this is, it will kill itself. It'll fill up with water and not be able to lift. So they don't catastrophic. They be catastrophic for hours, but not, and we can calculate it.
Your graphic right here kind of illustrates my limited knowledge in looking at a well, because I've seen this so many times, and I just assumed that it stopped at the end there. I never thought about where it goes. And so this little piece over here in the corner where it shows that it actually comes out and does something and it's going sideways and how it's contained, that was so educational to me after years of seeing this. And so I'm just offering to other people that have seen this limited view, that's actually where it goes and how it does the rest of what you're talking about to go somewhere else and have a bigger impact. Because it's always been told to me it's in concrete and you don't have to worry about it. That worries me.
We worry about it. We make it. That's what I do for a living, is map where it goes and build confidence in that. Yeah.
Yeah, my question is over worker safety. So I know you said that it doesn't explode or it doesn't ignite, but it does displace oxygen in the local area if it escapes. How quickly does a worker have to get out of the area? How long does that kind of effect last? And are we talking about passing out? Are we talking about dizziness? What are we talking about?
So as you say, it's an asphyxiant. You could read the health and safety. When we bought our dry ice. The guy in the shop warned us about it. He thought we were he called me a girl, but I've been called a girl recently. You girls take care and make sure that you're ventilating your car. So it's a genuine risk, and we should be careful about it because it displaces air and it will hug the ground. So in low-lying areas, and most of the hazard is being animals that sleep on the ground. If there's there's about 5 or 6 places that there's been a problem with the CO2 well that was improper and it leaked. I can tell you where and when. And there have been several animals that were lying in the brush on the ground that were killed. So that's hazardous. But it mixes with air. So you could come, we have a tank of CO2 for you to play with if you want to see how it mixes. I mean, it's a small amount, but it's not, you could get an idea of the hazard. It mixes with air, so it doesn't stay very long. When I've dumped a tank of CO2 at the end of a project and we pour it out, it comes up about to your knees, and sometimes to catch a whisk, we have sensors up at nose level to make sure that our workers are safe. So every once in a while they'll catch a sensor a bit and go off, and it leaves. And it depends on how much you released and how fast you released. So it could, in a low-lying area, in a gully, it could be hazardous. But most of the time, if you're up in a house, you're okay. So.
Just a clarifying question. Are there safety guidelines for workers?
Let's ask PHMSA, who does these things, the pipelines. There are safety guidelines for handling CO2. They're mostly for industrial settings, like where there are breweries. They release a lot of CO2 from beverages, and they have to have confined space rules. Outside, we have to watch it, but it's not a dramatic. I mean, not very catastrophic. It's dangerous, but not more dangerous than most things you've dealt with. So.
Okay, so we can revisit that question with PHMSA a little later in the agenda. There's another question here. I want to make sure we get.
Just wanted to comment on that last point about the danger, because here in Houston we have an issue called like cumulative impacts, where we're affected by so many different things. So any additional hazard is elevated because we're so vulnerable already. But my question is, I know you mentioned that when you put the carbon in the ground, it's permanently stored there. But then there's also things that can go wrong, like with the casing that gets corroded. I was out in Ector County last week, and a resident, had pictures of
Some of the West Texas problems.
yeah, West Texas. It's an Oxy project, and these pictures show corrosion, and they're causing issues on his property already. So anyway, it seems like
So
does
let me
permanence depend on human error, human.
So in the Permian Basin, there's been a lot of problems about saltwater disposal. That's then there's been a big problem for the state, for the Railroad Commission as the regulatory agency, and for local residents. So there's a lot of problems in the Permian. These are not Class 6 wells, and they don't have CO2 in them. They're saltwater disposal wells related to production from fracking, from unconventional production. I'd love to talk to you more. I know a great deal about it. I can tell you a lot about it, but they're not related to the CO2. In fact, they have CO2 operations in West Texas that are fine since the 70s. And so my team monitored the 800 wells at the Sack Rock oil field operated by Kinder Morgan. We were sure we were going to find some leaky wells. We were extremely disappointed not to find any, because it would have made a much better science study, right? To find a few. We didn't want them all be leaking because that'd be dangerous, but we thought we'd find a few. And so what we found was that they actually were performing correctly. So these are the things you watch for to make sure you don't have one of the yahoos. And there are dozens, probably, of badly behaved wells on Earth, not thousands, dozens. So you don't want any near you. This is how you prevent them from being near you. It's by doing this, by watching for these things, and you watch with the regulations require the operator to do this, and you ask them if they did any of these things. Have you done any of these things wrong? So,
I guess my concern is just that it seems like the permanence is reliant on proper maintenance, and in Texas we have history of poor maintenance around operations, like industrial operations.
Okay, so permanence is with respect to atmosphere. So we want to keep it. So almost even if you had, when we opened, my colleagues and I opened wells in Mississippi to produce them as fast as we could to see what happened on purpose, that we could produce them for 6 hours. So that would be a hazard if you were sleeping on the ground right there. But it wouldn't really disturb the permanence. Almost all the CO2 that we had injected in the previous 3 years was still there. So it's stuck. It's not that none can come out, but almost all of it gets stuck. So permanence means, I mean that what you put down gets you the benefit for the atmosphere. But you can also watch out for hazard for people living near wells. So, which is a short term, it's acute. It's the difference between a chronic problem that keeps going and an acute problem that happens. So the leakage at wells happens for a short period. You have to go in and fix it before it makes a big mess or damages something or somebody, right? So the leakage is an acute problem. The permanence is permanent for a long duration.
Thank you.
Is that clear enough? Okay.
Yeah, I know that we're going to
We're running out
require
of
more
time.
ongoing discussion. Yeah. So I know that there are a few more questions. I'm going to, if you all are okay with it, I'd like to keep moving us forward with the agenda. We can continue to address the questions. We have many more Q&A sessions. And I'd invite even past speakers or anybody with relevant expertise to address questions during the Q&A moving forward.
I bet you some of the later speakers, the same topics are going to come around again, so you're going to get another shot at asking the questions. So.
Okay, so we don't want to ignore your questions. We want to make sure you get the opportunity to ask them.
And I'll give you my name and number. Call me if you're not satisfied. Call me, write me. I'll answer.
Okay, and I'm asking if that's okay. Okay. Cool. All right.
So thank you, guys.
It's fine. Yep. Okay. All right, thank you. It is tough. There are lots of important things to talk about, and staying on track with the agenda and making sure that everybody gets an opportunity to participate is difficult, so I appreciate the flexibility, everyone. And I'm going to try to keep us moving forward as quickly as possible. Our next speaker is going to be Stuart Mueller. Apologize if I mispronounce your last name. Okay, awesome. who's with the Harris County Pollution Control. And look forward to your comments and your remarks. Okay, yes.
All right, can y'all hear me? All right. My name is Stuart Mueller. I'm with the Harris County Pollution Control. Have to admit that I was not the first one invited to come talk for our department. Dr. Babin got the initial request, and she couldn't make it tonight, so y'all are stuck with me. I'm going to talk about, I know the agenda says talking about air quality. We're going to talk about air quality, but we're going to focus on at Harris County Pollution Control's monitoring capabilities. I'm going to focus on three things. I'm going to talk about our CAMP program, our ozone network, and then our mobile monitoring capabilities. And oh yeah, by the way, this is not going to take the entire time. You're not going to have to raise your hand for me. All right. First thing I wanted to chat about was our CAMP monitoring program. Back in 2019, Commissioner's Court basically tasked pollution control with setting up and implementing a monitoring program out in the communities. And since that time, we have established 22 sites. No, make that 23. We got a new one a couple months ago, I believe. And most of them are in county parks. Some are in some county facilities, and then we have a couple that are just out at other facilities. I'm going to go to the next slide because this kind of gets into the details. What we've set up at these sites are monitors called S-Pods. They're Sensit S-Pods. They're capable of monitoring VOCs, particulate, and they also have the capability of we can set up a SUMA canister to pop or go off and collect a sample if concentrations of VOCs hit a certain level. They are also capable of collecting metadata, which helps us if something shows up, we can maybe track down a source if there is one. And the good thing about these sites is they are solar powered. So it does take a little time to set them up, but wait a minute, we lost a picture here. That picture that's what they look like. They're fairly simple. It does take some doing to get them set up because we have to typically put them behind a fence or something to kind of protect them. But we found them to be very reliable. And so let's see, do I have anything else? I guess that's it. Let me move on. We have an ozone network. Back in early 2000s, I believe 2002, we implemented an ozone monitoring program, and it's basically to supplement and complement what the TCEQ has established in our area. They host our data on their website as well as we host on ours. And we've tried to add more ozone monitors, and we've not been very successful. I think the TCQ is happy with what the area has right now. I'm not saying anything else. Let's talk a little bit about our mobile monitoring. Also in 2019, we were tasked with getting a mobile monitoring van set up or vehicle. And this picture right here is what we have now. We use it for all kinds of things. We use it for investigation support. We use it during times of emergency, and that includes storms. And we also, when we're not doing that kind of stuff, we're taking it out and just taking it to neighborhoods and doing what we're calling blue sky monitoring, just to kind of give us a background of what's going on. This vehicle has some pretty sensitive equipment. The main piece of equipment we have is the aromatox. It monitors for VOCs. Yes, sir. Huh? Oh, what? That never happens. Anyway, it's capable of monitoring for VOCs in two different ways. We have a rapid scan mode and a lab scan mode. The lab scan mode is the one that we use the most, but rapid scan lets us monitor for things like ethylene oxide, but you can't run them both at the same time. You do one, that's what you get. So anyway, I'm not going to get into the how those things work. Next, we have all of the data that these three monitoring systems generate is hosted on our website. This is what our camp monitoring site looks like. It's fairly user friendly. We are looking into making it more user friendly. So time will tell. That's in the works. This is what our ozone page looks like. When you zoom out, you can see all the sites. You zoom in, you can see this. You can also click on in the top right. You can pick what day or what week you want to look at, and then we have a very similar setup for our RAM. And the highlighted areas on the map are the areas that we actually set this thing up, collect some data, and you can click on it, and you can see what the data that was collected on any given day. And I think with that, I'm done. Did I make it? All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'll just, okay, we'll have you back up in just a few minutes for the Q&A. So thank you. Yep. And next, I want to introduce Sarah Hamilton, who is a technology policy fellow at the U.S. Department of Energy in the Carbon Management Program, and is going to be speaking to 6+ years of research in this particular field. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah. Hey everyone, really excited to be here today and learn from all of you. This is my first time in this community, so it's really great to be here with you all. So I work at the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management at the U.S. Department of Energy, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work we're doing on understanding the air quality impacts of carbon capture. Before that, a little bit about me. I'm an engineer and a scientist. I started working on carbon management during my PhD. Here are some pictures of me working in the lab on carbon capture materials and also visiting different carbon capture projects. Outside of work, I'm a lover of the outdoors. I like hiking, and I grew up being outside a lot. One of the reasons I actually work on carbon management is because I think it's one of the many solutions that will help us preserve the beauty of the natural world all around us from climate change. Now, enough about me. Moving on to what our office does. So at the Office of Carbon Management, we support research, development, and demonstration of carbon management technologies. So this refers to a system of technologies that can capture carbon dioxide and systematically remove it. In terms of carbon capture, we can do that here on the left side, either from a concentrated point source or from the air. That carbon dioxide is then transported and either sent to geological storage, or it can also be converted to products. So different divisions in our office work on different areas of this map, but today I'm specifically focusing on the point source carbon capture side of things. So we've been working on carbon capture at the Department of Energy for quite some time. Our research program started in 2008. We were doing a lot of research in the lab to improve the properties of carbon capture materials, to lower the cost of these technologies, and to improve their performance. Since then, we have learned a lot and have moved on to scaling up these technologies and engineered systems, and also to leverage all the knowledge we've gained from carbon capture at the lab scale to apply it to other industries like direct air capture, industrial applications, etc. Now, we're also interested at this stage in understanding the air quality impacts of carbon capture and possible co-benefits. So I'll zoom into that now. Maybe. Let's see. Okay. So what do we talk about when we're saying co-benefits on air quality of carbon capture? So let's take a look at the point source facility that's emitting carbon dioxide from the process. This facility will also be producing co-pollutants like those that Stu told us about now, including particulate matter, SOx, and NOx. Now, when we add the carbon capture system here, we are capturing CO2 that was produced in that process that's shown in green here and sending it to storage or conversion. Now, in addition to capturing carbon dioxide, this carbon capture facility can also remove some of those co-pollutants that were produced, and this happens in this green box here, the polishing system, and that will lead to co-benefits associated with actually removing some of those air pollutants from the process. Now, these co-benefits that we can achieve are not the same across facilities, and there have been pretty limited studies on understanding how they vary across different facilities. So at the Department of Energy, we are working to fill that data gap by asking all of our funded projects to measure co-pollutant removal across facilities. And we're doing this at our National Carbon Capture Center in Alabama, as well as different pilots across the country. So we're currently working on collecting and processing that data, and that will be made publicly available on our Carbon Management Resources portal. We also upload information on other peer-reviewed studies that have looked at air quality impacts of carbon capture, so definitely I encourage you to take a look here and look for resources in this space. Okay, so in addition to co-pollutant removal and carbon capture, something else that we are working on at the department is understanding possible air emissions associated with carbon capture materials. So the solvents that we use for carbon capture can break down or degrade over time as we run our carbon capture processes. And it's important that we measure, manage, and avoid any types of emissions that might come from that process. So this is ongoing work that we're doing at the department. To give you a few examples of how we're tackling this area, the first is we're supporting research into carbon capture technologies that do not emit any of the secondary emissions. So that would be on the avoidance side of things. Also on the avoidance side, we're working on having our projects implement engineering controls. So there are engineering controls that can be implemented in processes to remove those emissions and preventing from entering the atmosphere. So we're working in this space as well. And on the monitoring side, we have been working for the last year to develop this mobile emissions lab. I'm really excited about this because I've been talking to scientists for a year about it. But this will be a mobile trailer that will be visiting different carbon capture sites and measuring any possible emissions associated with the process. And these are the most precise instruments available. So this will be a best-in-class facility that we're working on, and we'll be able to determine anything that's being produced in those processes. So I wish I had more time. If you have any questions about carbon capture that you want to answer, please come and talk to me after. And with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, Stuart, as well. And do we have questions for any speakers? Okay, see you here. Okay, we'll get you next.
Is it a requirement that the facilities that are going to have those have some kind of similar technology to the trailer that you take out, that they're monitoring that around on the outside of their fence line?
The carbon capture facilities specifically?
Right, where they're actually
just to clarify.
Unit or something that's looking at that outside of the fence line.
Yes, so these carbon capture projects will be asked to measure emissions. So this will be specifically at the stack, but we are also working with EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, who will be doing measurements outside the fence line. So we'd specifically be looking at the stack, but we are engaging with EPA, who's a regulatory body, and they will be in charge of outside the fence line measurements, yeah.
Oh, and also feel free to ask questions of Stuart as well.
Yes, he's let me here all alone to answer everything.
Thank you so much. In one of your slides, you mentioned the clean flue gas. I have two quick questions.
Yeah.
Can you specify what clean flue gas is? Second quick question, how do you separate CO2 from those different NOx, SOx, COx, or water vapor? Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's a great question. So let me go back to the carbon capture slide. Okay, so the flue gas is the exhaust gas that's produced in the point source facility, that will have CO2, nitrogen, and any other types of co-pollutants, including NOx and SOx. So what I mean with clean flue gas is cleaning up those co-pollutants, the particulate matter, the SOx, and the NOx, that then will go into the carbon capture system to pull off the CO2. So that CO2 would be sent to storage, and then into the atmosphere, we're just emitting nitrogen, right, which is non-hazardous. So that's what cleaning up the flue gas means in terms of how these technologies works. So before we feed the flue gas into the carbon capture system, we'd have this engineered system, the polishing system, that will be things like filters, SCRs, that would clean up the SOx, NOx, and PM. And then the carbon capture system uses a solvent-based technology, or others, but this would be the most well-known, an amine material that's a chemical that can capture that CO2 from the flue gas. Does that answer? Yeah, okay.
You mentioned that the EPA will be monitoring as the regulatory authority. Oh, I'm right here.
Oh, sorry.
I saw you looking around. If primacy is granted to the Texas Railroad Commission, does that regulatory authority then transfer over? That would mean that the regulatory authorities transfers over to them. So would that monitoring responsibility also transfer over to the Texas Railroad Commission?
I'm not an expert on the regulatory side of things. I don't think that would affect air quality monitoring by EPA, which is what I was referring to. But there are people from EPA here, not air quality people, but they might be the ones who answer that. Over there? Okay. Yeah.
Do we want to?
Thanks, Sue.
Okay, so do we want to jump back to that after the EPA presentation, or would you all like to weigh in now? We can cover that quickly if you're comfortable with that. Okay, great.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just not the person to answer that.
Hey everyone, I'm Sharon Newman at EPA headquarters. And so for carbon dioxide injection, that is class 6 wells, and that's under the Underground Injection Control Program. And I'm going to give a talk on that in probably a couple minutes. And so when you all are talking about primacy, you're talking about UIC primacy for class 6. In regards to air emissions, that's covered by EPA's Office of Air and Radiation. So that's separate from the Underground Injection Control Program that we work for. And so there's the greenhouse gas reporting requirements and stuff like that. And if you all have questions, please come talk to us and we can give you contact information for that office.
Okay, so to be clear, the EPA continues to regulate air quality emissions even if primacy for class 6 goes to a different organization.
So class 6 primacy would be the state agency that receives primacy. It sounded like TCEQ, it deals with air emissions. So I'm not as familiar with that, but maybe others can chime in if they're, yeah.
I don't know, air.
Okay. The other agency that regulates environmental issues, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, holds many of EPA's air responsibilities here. Some EPA keeps nationally, but many of them are the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ. Air is not involved in Class 6.
Okay, great. We have a couple more questions. The individual here in the blue jacket. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Stewart. You mentioned the mobile unit, something talks, air talks, aroma talks.
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, are communities able to request that unit to come out, or how do you know or decide where to send out this unit?
We're not there yet. We want to be. We're in the process of possibly getting another RAM and maybe 2 more. At that point, we might be able to do that. It has to do with availability and manpower.
But is the unit operating right now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And my second question to that is that data able to be used for regulatory purposes?
Right now, it's being used just to collect background data. We can use it for regulatory purposes, but we have to go backwards. We can't just say, okay, this was detected, somebody did something wrong, because just because it's in the air doesn't mean it's not authorized to be emitted somewhere. So we have to look at all that stuff, and we do.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Kind of, sort of?
Yeah, because you mentioned you share data regularly with TCEQ, so I'm wondering, are they able to use the data that you are collecting as well?
Our data is available to anybody that wants to look at it on our website. The TCEQ hosts only our ozone data. And
but they are not they're not utilizing the mobile unit.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
If they are, I'm unaware of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I think we have about 5 more hands in the crowd and only a few more minutes left in this session, so we're going to try to get as many as we can. Okay, then I think yep, and then...
Hi, big picture question. Does the Department of Energy have goals for the amount of CO2 to be captured in this fashion? And how does that compare with the amount of CO2 produced by industry?
Yeah, so for carbon capture projects, our usual metric is for projects to capture 95% of the CO2 that's produced in any of these facilities. So that would be the goal. So if this were a coal-fired power plant, the carbon capture process would have to capture 95% of the carbon dioxide that was produced in that plant for it to be funded by the Point Source Capture Program at DOE.
Can you repeat the last sentence?
Yeah. So our goal for carbon capture on a point source is 95% of the CO2 produced at a given facility being captured in the capture process. Yeah, that's our goal in our funding calls in the Point Source Capture Program. The goal for capture is 95%. They have to demonstrate in their application that the technology is capable of capturing 95% of the CO2. Yes.
I think the question was about all of the emissions. Like, how much of all of the emissions of Texas are supposed to be captured by carbon capture, according to the DOE?
I don't think we have an estimate for that, as far as I know, but I can definitely check in and see if I can get back.
We have programmatic goals, right, for our funding work for over a number of years. I don't have those numbers on hand, but they're publicly available and we can look at, get them for you. So the Point Source Capture Program has targets that it's trying to get to within a certain amount of time. The Carbon Storage Program has amount of storage volumes we're trying to get to at set intervals. I work in storage, so I can tell you we've got for 2030, for 2035, and for 2050. And we do a lot of work on what is going to be required to make a difference to make those goals. But I don't have the numbers with me, but that is public information that we can get for you.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. The Department of Energy will be releasing its carbon management strategy tomorrow. So be on the lookout, but a lot of those targets are in there. It's a very comprehensive document. We don't have all that data memorized today. We apologize, but we do have a strategic focus for carbon management, and that release tomorrow will have a lot of details for you.
All right, we'll take just one more question in this segment. Thanks.
Thank you. Just relevant to that, in terms of funding, and since this is a portion on emergency response, A report that came out about 5 months ago from the General Accounting Office found that the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management actually was deficient in awarding funding to projects, making sure that they did proper risk assessment, and found that a mismanagement in funding of projects that didn't actually adhere to DOE standards for carbon capture were being followed. And so the administrator of the office agreed with those and stated that they would be updating those criteria. And so I was wondering with, for example, the money that has been released, the first tranche for the Baytown project, is that going to be following the updated guidances for this mismanagement of funds that was found by the GAO?
Is there anybody here from FECM that can speak to that? Or was that an OSED project? It was okay.
Yeah, so to address your question, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, a component of that, that creation was a response to that report. And when I do my presentation, I'll go through the phased approach that we use to bring greater checkpoints for how funding is allocated and improved. And that strategy is being applied across DOE programs. So when I present in a few minutes, I'll kind of go over that briefly about how we are responding to that report.
Just really quickly, though, as a point of clarification, OSED isn't responsible for almost 70% of the release of funding for this. It's the Office of Fossil Fuel Energy, correct? Not OSED?
Right. What I'm saying is that the programming and design functions that were created under my office are a new best practice that are being implemented across DOE as to be a comprehensive way that we approach funding. I'm not saying we have responsibility. What I'm saying is we are responding to the report the way that we do our funding allocation. And I can describe how OSID is doing it.
Great, thank you. All right, I want to say thank you for our speakers in this segment and also for all the questions as well. All right, the next portion of our agenda, as was mentioned, this is our safety, preparedness, and emergency response portion of the program. Next, we're going to be talking about regulations. And I believe first we're going to have Sharon Newman. Sharon is a physical scientist with particular expertise in earth science and is going to be offering some perspectives related to the underground injection control permitting work that's being done. All right, and here you are.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good evening. My name is Sharon Newman. I'm a physical scientist at EPA headquarters, and I work in the Underground Injection Control Branch. So EPA's authority over the Underground Injection Control Program, or the UIC program, comes from the Safe Drinking Water Act. Now, this act directed EPA to develop a program that would protect underground sources of drinking water. Subsequently, EPA developed the UIC program, which regulates the injection of fluids underground into the subsurface for the purposes of storage or disposal. And when we say fluids, what we mean here are things like water, wastewater, brine from oil and gas production, and carbon dioxide. Now, the goal of the UIC program is the protection of underground sources of drinking water. The UIC program regulates an injection well throughout the lifetime of that project. What that means is from site evaluation all the way until site closure. The UIC program oversees permitting, and for the injection of carbon dioxide, this involves a rigorous review process. The program also ensures that monitoring and reporting requirements are met and conducts regular inspections of the site. And this occurs throughout the lifetime of the project as well. Now, there are 6 types of injection well classes, and these are categorized by injection activity. Today, we're here to talk about Class 6, which is for the injection of carbon dioxide underground for the purposes of long-term storage. This is also known as geologic sequestration. In addition, the Safe Drinking Water Act also establishes a process by which states, tribes, and territories can apply for, and if approved by EPA, receive oversight of the UIC program. In all states, tribes, and territories that do not have primacy oversight of the UIC program, EPA directly implements the UIC program. Now, here in Texas, the Texas Railroad Commission has primacy for Class 2 wells. Those are for oil and gas production. And the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality has primacy for well classes 1, 3, and 5. Texas does not have primacy for Class 6, so what that means is EPA directly implements the Class 6 program in the state. Now, the Class 6 rule manages the unique aspects of carbon dioxide, including the risks that are unique to carbon dioxide injection. And in fact, the Class 6 rule is one of the most stringent in the UIC program. Now, part of this involves a requirement that CO2, carbon dioxide that is injected underground, must remain in the injection formation. So no leakages must occur. And this is done through extensive site characterization and evaluation to ensure that the CO2 is trapped underground and doesn't leak into, for example, other formations, into underground sources of drinking water, or to the surface. In addition, as we heard from Sue earlier in the day, if there are any artificial penetrations around the injection well, so orphaned or abandoned wells, if there are any present, these must be evaluated to ensure that they won't cause any CO2 leakage. Now, we understand that many communities are concerned about the possibility of seismicity. The Class 6 rule does have safeguards to take this into account, and these involve firstly, the seismic history of the area must be determined. In addition, it must be determined that there are no faults or fractures around that injection site that might cause CO2 leakage. And then finally, EPA recommends that seismic monitoring be conducted throughout the lifetime of the project. So what this means is that if it happens that there is any sort of seismic activity occurring, no matter how small, even if it's not felt at the surface, it can be identified immediately and appropriate actions can be taken, such as slowing down the injection rate. Now, I want to spend some time on the Class 6 permitting process. As I mentioned, the review process for Class 6 is one of the most rigorous review processes, and this involves a technical review phase, which typically lasts around 18 months. During that technical review phase, a Class 6 applicant's application is evaluated for things like site characterization to ensure that the site is sufficient to contain the amount of TOO injected into it, a well construction plan, a testing and monitoring plan. It's also evaluated for an emergency and remedial response plan. In addition, the financial responsibility of the applicant is also evaluated to determine that the applicant has sufficient financial responsibility to cover the project throughout its lifetime, and that the public does not bear the burden, does not bear the cost of that project. EPA strives for transparency throughout the lifetime of the Class 6 project, and there are also opportunities for public engagement. So EPA recommends that the applicant reach out to the local community very early on in the permitting process, even during the application phase. But in addition, EPA will also take it upon ourselves to conduct that early outreach, to get that information out to the communities. There are also requirements for public participation throughout the Class 6 permitting process. And so these include things like if a draft permit is issued, there will be a public comment period and possibly a hearing. And during this time, the local communities can submit comments, can voice their concerns, and this is all taken into account before a final permitting decision is made. And I should mention that the timeline for the Class 6 permitting process is 24 months, and that's to make a determination to issue a permit to construct the well. And so I know this is a really long list, so apologize for the small font here, but we just wanted to list a few tools that we have on our website that might help convey some information about Class 6. So if you go to our website, these are all linked directly on there. But just to go over a few, we have guidance documents that are available on the website for all different kinds of things like well construction guidelines. And also a Class 6 data repository, which houses all sorts of permitting documents, such as permit application material, draft and final permits, and so forth. And then here on the last slide, I just want to put up some contact information, also our UIC website, our Class 6 website, and then if any questions come up after this event today, our contact information as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. We're going to have our next speaker is James Prothero, who is with PHMSA, and will be talking to us about regulations related to CO2 pipelines. All right, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, man. Good evening. My name is Jay Prothero. I work for the U.S. Department of Transportation Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. For those of you that don't know, we're divided into two separate entities within that organization. We have the hazardous materials part, and then we are on the Office of Pipeline Safety. I have an associate with me tonight, Ashley Kroon, who I may have to rely on because she's a lot smarter than I am. So what is it that we do? I think it's important that people understand because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about the Office of Pipeline Safety. So we establish rules that operators of pipeline systems must adhere to. We have oversight for that. We inspect, we audit their records, we look at facilities on the ground periodically, depending on when inspection might be scheduled. And then if the need arises, we can issue punishment if they're not following the regulations, and if they're not following their own O&M manual that they're required to have in writing on site and available for their hands. We also do research, and we do a lot of evaluation of new technologies and things like that. And we also provide grants for various things. We provide grants to the states. We provide technical assistance grants for various things, and then we provide a lot of R&D grants that we'll mention again in just a little bit. The other thing that we're responsible for that I have to do is engage with the public. We get out and meet with people, talk to them, answer questions, and try to help them understand what we do and what we can and cannot do. So along with the rules and regulations we issue, one thing that we do have, and one thing that we do and have been doing since the 70s, is we do have safety authority over CO2 pipelines. Regulatory authority right now is limited to supercritical lines, and so we're working to add to our regulatory authority as we advance the CO2 rule I'll mention in just a minute. So this defines in a little bit more detail specifically what we can and cannot do. We are not involved in the manufacture, anything that goes on at the storage facility. We have no regulatory purview there. We specifically handle the safety oversight for the pipeline facility that might move the CO2 from one point to a storage facility, or even from a storage facility to somewhere else, if that happens to be the case. And then there could be intermittent stopovers for product, depending on various avenues that we would have authority over. But everything else tied to that, we do not have any authority over. And I want to point out also that we have absolutely zero siting authority for any pipeline facility related to CO2 or any pipeline period. That siting authority it falls elsewhere. Pardon me. So in the network of the 3.2 million miles of pipeline in the U.S. that we have jurisdictional authority over, 5,340 miles currently exist of CO2 pipelines. Most of that is supercritical, so it falls under the liquids regulations. Pardon me. In your county here, in Harris County, there's very little CO2 pipelines existing today. Is there a possibility for more at some point? Absolutely. We don't know what that might look like a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. But right now, you've got very few miles, very, very little out here kind of southeast of the downtown Houston. I want to point out while I'm thinking about it, there are some QR codes through the slide deck here. I think at some point you'll have access to these. I would encourage you to look at these QR codes and get a little bit more information about some of the things we're talking about. Now that we've established that you've got very little CO2 pipeline here, I'd like to speak to the incident rates that we have seen on CO2 and other pipelines as we've gone along. So, just for comparison purposes, general hazardous liquid pipelines, the incident rate per 1,000 miles over the last 20 years has been roughly 1.9 incidents per 1,000 miles of pipe. For CO2, that number is much lower. It's almost half that at 1 per 1,000 miles of pipe. The pipelines have been safe. They've been managed. They've been audited. They've been inspected. They've been maintained like they should. And there's only been one serious incident, and you all are familiar with that, in right outside of Satartia, Mississippi, in 2020, after many weeks of heavy, heavy rains. And just to note, they have land features there that we don't have along the Gulf Coast. You know, it's flat here, right? But where this happened, they actually have land features, and so all of these weeks of rain caused a landslide, which ended up shifting a pipe and fracturing that pipe at a weld, and subsequently there was a release of CO2. Now, the outcome of that was there was 45 to 50 people who sought medical attention, and roughly 200 people had to be evacuated from their homes until the all safe. So from this, I do want to point out the QR code again here because it has the incident report and other information related to that if you're interested. Now from that, and what PHMSA does is we take away and we learn, and it informs where we go prospectively as we design new regulations, as we put new rules in place, as we modify what's existing so that we can be more effective in our role. So from that incident, that started the conversation around a CO2 rule, and work has begun on that. It's going to primarily address emergency preparedness and response, among a few other things. The notice of proposed rulemaking is due out very shortly, sometime this last quarter of 2024, and we're all standing by hoping that happens very quickly. Something I mentioned earlier is R&D projects. What I'd like to do, if I could, Ashley, I'd like for her to come up and mention a little, because she's heavily involved in the R&D projects, and we'll finish up after that.
Hi, my name is Ashley. I work with Jay at PHMSA, and I work in the Engineering and Research Division. And we do have, since Satartia happened, we've awarded $1.9 million in research funds for CO2-related projects. And we have 2 in Texas. Texas A&M is working on a dispersion model for CO2 pipeline releases. They're doing great work using machine learning, so some really cool technology. And then we just awarded one a couple weeks ago to the University of North Dakota Energy and Environmental Research Center, and they're actually partnering with Lamar University, which is right here in your backyard. And that's a really cool project that I'm excited about. They're going to look at what we're going to see in captured CO2 for things that aren't CO2. Those are things we have to consider when we look at pipeline integrity. So I'm excited about that. If you want to learn more about research, come see me and I can direct you to our website.
Thanks. Here's a few more links for you. Please, if you have an opportunity to get these, please do. Thank you very much.
All right, questions for any of our speakers?
Thank you. Was that 1.08 per year or for the entire history?
For the 20-year history, it's 1.08 per 1,000 miles. So that's the
Thanks.
average, 1.08.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, this question is for Ms. Sharon. Regarding the groundwater and how EPA will be monitoring it, how soon do y'all start monitoring it? As soon as the project starts? How often do you monitor it? And then I'll have a follow-up question for that.
Sure. So that can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So there are testing and monitoring requirements that happen throughout the lifetime of the project. And so what happens, just to start at the beginning, the applicant will submit an application that contains a testing and monitoring plan that's reviewed by EPA or the permitting authority through that rigorous review process. And then testing and monitoring will start. There's a pre-operational phase after the well is constructed, where there's pre-operational testing and monitoring. So here, injection has not even started yet, and the monitoring and testing is occurring to show the permitting authority or to demonstrate that there's no deviation from that which was predicted in the application. If we find a case where there is a deviation, that would likely start a modification to the permit to ensure that USDWs are protected. But I think the question that you're getting at is when, during the injection phase, and for how long does that monitoring occur? So what happens is it occurs at periodic intervals throughout the injection phase as well as the post-injection phase. So once injection stops, even during that post-injection period, there's continued monitoring and testing. And this is occurring at various frequencies, depending on the requirements. For example, there's required continuous monitoring of things like pressure at the wellhead and so forth, and then more regular monitoring for other things as well.
Thank you. And the follow-up question is, you're talking about that EPA will have like a public permit hearing, and you all also encourage said entity to do their own community engagement. How do you all enforce that? Like to make sure that that entity is doing community engagement? And let's say that EPA gets a bunch of comments from community members that say that they don't want this. How does EPA take that feedback and apply it to that project?
Sure. So EPA recommends that applicants reach out to local communities early on in the permitting process. However, we are ourselves reaching out to the community, so we're taking it upon ourselves to reach out. And so since Texas is in Region 6, we reached out to our Region 6 office, and they said that some examples of ways that they reach out to local community are, and particularly if issuing a draft permit, would be through local newspapers. That's actually a requirement. Through mailing flyers out to interested parties. Recently, they posted on regs.gov, also posted to their Class 6 website. So we want to get that information out there. Additionally, recently EPA has updated our Class 6 website to enhance transparency, and we've added a couple tools there to let folks know where exactly these projects are located. So one example is the Class 6 tracker, and you can go right to Region 6. You go right to our website, click on the project, go right to Region 6, and see which projects EPA is reviewing in the region.
Thank you.
In cases of a rupture with a pipeline, is PHMSA required to release information about the volume and the health impacts associated with the releases of the rupture? And how quickly does that information get out to the community?
What typically happens in time of a rupture is operators are required within 24 hours to make notification to the National Notification Center. And then that information is then relayed to PHMSA from the National Notification Center. As you might imagine, there's pipelines all over the place, and we don't automatically get a call, but it comes from them. Typically, within just a few hours, we're aware of it, and then they have 48 hours. Yeah, 48 hours to provide an update and provide additional information related to quantity, any other impacts, injuries, fatalities, hospitalizations, and other things like that. So PHMSA does not make notification to the public. That typically won't happen until, well, you won't find anything out about that until it comes out. I mean, the news media will provide a lot of information before we're ever able to get there. We have protocols for our accident investigation division out of Oklahoma City to look into and approach and go to these sites to evaluate and do an investigation on what happened. Oftentimes, if it's a serious enough incident, the NTSB is also involved. And as information becomes solidified and accurate, then you'll see some more information released. But short of that, every investigation that's done and every fine that we issue or notice of proposed violation or whatever mechanism we use to go after an operator is public information on our webpage. That is something that is outside of our purview. That would come from someone else. It could come from the NTSB. It could come from in the case of Texas, it could come from a TCEQ or some other organization. But that's data that we do not have. We don't have records for or no history for. Certainly, absolutely.
Also note that our next presenter is going to talk more about local response as well.
I'm going to fall over.
I think this is for Sharon. You had a good information about the permitting process. You had a big flow chart there, so I may have missed it. What, as part of the permitting process, when you're assessing these permits, do you require, does it involve them showing that there is a preemptive hazard analysis system in part of their process before fabrication, before construction? Is that something that the DOE, the EPA requires these companies to have before they even start breaking ground?
Yeah, so that's part of the Class 6 application where applicants must demonstrate the composition of the CO2 stream, and importantly, that their well construction plan is constructed with materials that are not only compatible with that CO2 stream, but also with the surrounding environment. And then throughout the lifetime of the project, there's the testing and monitoring that I spoke about earlier, as well as corrosion testing and whatnot to ensure that the well, and mechanical integrity testing to ensure that everything's going as predicted.
So you're pretty specific about some things, but I think more as a general hazard analysis on a global scale in terms of their project. You may have, you definitely hit on a few things, but, and maybe I can get some more information to you later about the entire permitting process, but it's mainly like a big picture culture of safety preemptively as opposed to waiting to respond to emergency. Ideally, you don't want an emergency in the first place. So how to mitigate and control inevitable hazards that are in place.
So thanks for your follow-up. Hazardous waste cannot go into a Class 6 well. So hazardous waste will not be put into a Class 6 well. That would need to go under a Class 1 well, which is a completely different well class than what we're talking about today.
Hazard materials, I meant hazards in place.
Yeah, so again, that's part of the review process. So they're reviewing to see if the site is suitable to contain the CO2 stream that's being injected into it. So all that is being reviewed by scientists and engineers, either at EPA or at, if the state, tribe, or territory has privacy.
Sorry. I think you're using the word review, but I think part of the emphasis and part of what I'm understanding is that is still happening before the groundbreaking. That's still something that's preemptive, right?
Exactly. That's happening before the construction, and that's happening of the well. That's happening after the construction of the well and before injection, and everything needs to be shown that it is as was predicted in the application. If not, there's going to be a modification to ensure that underground sources of drinking water are protected. And then, as I mentioned before too, it's going to continue on throughout the lifetime of the project through site closure.
Okay, I think we had one more. Take one more question in this segment.
Yeah, my question is regarding the EPA permitting process. I understand that your position is that it is rigorous, that we make sure there's no fault lines, that it's geologically secure. But right now, in this moment, there is a leaking injection well in Decatur, Illinois. And I know based on our conversation yesterday, you're not allowed to speak on something that's an active investigation. But I think that speaks to a bit of a cognitive dissonance around the process. If it is as rigorous as you say, why are we experiencing a leak in an injection well so early? And on top of that, if we're going to apply that rigorous process to a state like Texas, which also has to deal with abandoned oil wells and has to deal with other injection wells that are pushing out polluted glaciers in West Texas, how is the current standard of this rigorous process going to affect Texas? It doesn't feel like there's any sort of reliable information about what is going to happen. And I get that you're only representing the permitting process, but I think from the EPA side, we need a lot more reassurances, a lot more promises. It's hard to promise accountability for a brand new industry when the current industry we currently have has zero accountability. What do you say to that? How should people be viewing EPA's approach to the permitting process when clearly it's not working in the moment?
So I hear your concern, and a couple of things. So firstly, yeah, this is an ongoing enforcement action, so I can't speak to the specifics of ADM. However, we can certainly talk about it generally, and I want to address your comment about orphaned wells. So as Sue mentioned in her presentation, an applicant must demonstrate that if there are any orphaned wells in the area of review around the injection well, that these need to show, they need to demonstrate that these will not act as a conduit for CO2 leakage. That's part of the application process, and it's part of the ongoing monitoring that's occurring. As far as leakage, so we can take a hypothetical example where if an injection well experiences leakage, that will be detected through the monitoring and testing system. As soon as that monitoring and testing reports any sort of deviation from the norm, we have an emergency and remedial response plan that goes along with Class 6 permitting. So the emergency and remedial response plan is a requirement for the application, and it becomes an enforceable component of the permit. The emergency and remedial response plan is specific to the site in question, so it's taking all the local information into account. So not only who to contact locally, but also what actions need to be taken at that specific site should any issue occur. And when I say action, that could mean things like slowing the injection rate, stopping the injection, and things of that sort. So there are safeguards in place by the Class 6 rule, and I mentioned earlier that this is one of the most stringent regulations in the UIC Class 6 program. So there are various safeguards in place that if anything should occur, and of course with proper operations, with proper well construction, with proper site characterization, we don't expect emergencies to occur. We do have that emergency and remedial response plan in place to protect underground sources of drinking water and prevent them from endangerment. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So I wanted to get back to, when I was answering you, I had a thought cross my mind and it didn't come out of my mouth. So I wanted to come back. So something that's key to keep in mind in the regulations, we require all operators to have in full engagement with the emergency services in the areas that they work and where they have facilities. And as part of that engagement, the emergency services are able, I'll do this. The emergency services are able to learn what kind of commodity is flowing in a pipeline, and then they work together to develop plans on how to respond to those incidents. Typically, and my good friend right here can straighten me out if I'm wrong, but typically, when there is an incident, the local fire chief will be the person in charge at the incident as it's resolved, if you will, and they're the ones, along with your LAPC people or other local officials, who will be in charge of an incident site that would share information regarding the issues with whatever's being released, evacuations, and things of that nature. So they'll be sharing that information. That's where it would come from. Okay? Okay.
Yeah, LEPCs are largely volunteer groups of community members. They don't have funding from the state or federal EPA to find expertise over the chemicals and their health impacts. And then two fire marshals have the same issue where they arrive on a site, it is an emergency, and I didn't want to. The Deer Park Pipeline Energy Transfer Partners, we never got an answer over what the associated health impacts and the quantities that came out of the pipeline. And we reached out to US EPA, EPA Region 6. We reached out to all the locals and have yet to get an answer. So, like I said, I can follow up via email, but it's a big concern that community members still don't know what is the burden that they took on their shoulders during those the 4-day event.
Certainly, and I appreciate that. So if you would, come by and visit with me for a moment when we're done, if you would. And I've got a couple of other things I could share with you. Okay? Thank you.
Really appreciate the points. So I know we are behind schedule, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, because I don't want the event to stretch on much later than we committed to, and place that burden on everybody's time and other obligations. I do want to introduce, as much of the conversation has been about local preparedness, and we just talked about the Fire Marshal's Office, I'd like to introduce Richard Lawhorn, who is the Deputy Chief for Howard County Fire Marshal's Office and can speak more to some of those concerns. So thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me okay? All right. So what I'm going to talk about is basically what we're doing kind of here on the local level, what we're doing in preparing for the carbon dioxide product. We already have so much of it on the road already being transported in Spec 341 or 338 tanker trucks. But when you start talking about pipelines, when you start talking about volumes and stuff like that, it kind of changes the game. And, pipelines are very safe, but when an incident happens, they can be very dynamic. And we know that based on, I brought a couple clips from, one from ITC and the other one from the pipeline incident we had right here on Spencer Highway, about 3 weeks ago. And, we spent about 4 days on that. And, those incidents, like I said, are very dynamic. A lot of decisions have to be made. And what I'll say real quick without jumping into it, whatever jurisdiction you live in, get a hold of that emergency management coordinator, okay? The emergency manager, okay? And he should be able to help you with any questions or concerns that you have. So real quick, let me kind of go through this. So my job is running the emergency operations of the Fire Marshal's Office. We're kind of unique. We have a hazmat team, which traditionally a lot of hazmat teams are associated with a fire department, but back during 9/11 when the Harris County Hazmat Team was formed. It was formed by Judge Eccles through the Fire Marshal's office. And so now we have Fort Bend County has their hazmat team through the Fire Marshal's office. Basically what we have in the Houston area, because arguably, or not arguably, we are the largest petrochemical cluster of complexes in the world, second to Rotterdam, you know, and like I said, that's arguably with Rotterdam. So basically what I will tell you is, you know, when things move, when people are doing stuff, things are going to happen, and we have to be prepared to respond to those things when they get bad and when they happen. So what do we have here in Houston? Basically, we have 5 FEMA Type 1 hazardous materials response team. All 5 of these teams are regional. So that means not only do we cover our jurisdiction, but we cover the 12 surrounding jurisdictions, okay? So we can go pretty much anywhere to help anybody at any time. And, you know, on the bad day, who knows how many resources that's going to take? Who knows how much work that's going to take? And I will tell you, a hazardous material incident can be very dynamic and very labor intensive. But the whole goal is public safety. Public safety is number one, okay? So, so that's our branch through, like I said, through the Fire Marshal's office. We do everything from WMD to radiation response, chlorine emergencies, drug labs, oil spills, biological sampling, you name it. We've got relationships built with not only the 4 other FEMA Type 1 teams, but we take pride in building a relationship with the Houston LRN, which is the biolab, so that if we did have a biological incident, we've already made friends with them. So as far as the carbon dioxide, you know, that's, you know, in liquid form, it's got an expansion ratio and it's going to expand out. And like someone said earlier, it's 1.5 times the weight of air, so it's going to sit real low. So that's going to give us an idea of where to look for it. We have mobile monitors, and we work very closely with Stuart and the Pollution Control Emergency Response Division. And what we do is we go out and we set up these monitors, and we can monitor it remotely. And that gives that person that's making the decisions on whether or not there needs to be that shelter in place, or heaven forbid, one of the worst decisions you ever have to make is evacuations. That's probably the hardest decision, because you move people out and you've just inconvenienced them. You know, when they're at home with everything they have, everything they need, it's still an inconvenience, but they're at least comfortable. When you move people, oh, that's horrible. So we got to be able to give those incident commanders, those people that are making those decisions, the best information possible. And those are going to be, you know, the local fire chief, the local police chief, the mayor, the people that are running the city. Those are the ones that are going to make those decisions for those jurisdictions. So we got to be prepared. Carbon dioxide is not flammable, but that doesn't mean it, you know, it's very dangerous compartmentalized, you know. So, you know, it's got its own dynamic set of hazards. So whether a pipeline's flammable or non-flammable, you know, you just, you know, there's different approaches that we have to take to be ready to respond. And so we met with Exxon. And I think they recently acquired Denbury, if I'm saying that right. So we met, we had a good meeting. Kristen, I think you were there at the meeting. And they actually invited our local hazmat teams to go to a new class that they put together up at Teeks. And I'm proud to say that we just had 3 of our hazmat techs just returned from that training, and they said it was very good training. That's the kind of partnerships we got to have to make this stuff work, you know? Because if we didn't have the chemical industry, we'd live like cavemen, really, you know? So there's a need for what is processed and what's manufactured and all that. and we can do it safely, and we can build those relationships. And I'll show you, here's a night we spent at ITC, and if I can, it's just a very short clip. I think it's going to play. And that's a lot of product going in the air based on wind direction. And if you guys know geographically that area, we're dense. Population-wise, we're dense in any direction you go, all right? So we got to go out there and make sure that people aren't breathing stuff that they shouldn't be breathing, or that they're protected from breathing stuff that they shouldn't be breathing while the emergency is going on, and then do our best as a hazmat team to help those agencies, those fire departments, make the problem go away. And then everybody gets back to a normal way of life. Here's the pipeline incident that happened in Deer Park. And that was dynamic in itself. I come out of industry, and I will tell you, if you told me something like this was going to happen, I'd say only in a movie, you know. But because we had built relationships with Chris Pettis and Don Davis, Chris Pettis, the fire chief of LaPorte, Deer Park, Don Davis, the fire chief at Deer Park at the time. We built those relationships with them. We built the relationships with Johnny Morales, the emergency management coordinator for LaPorte, Jamie Galloway for Deer Park, Hazel Carter for Pasadena. We know each other by name. We know each other by face. We know what each other brings to the table. So, you know, I said all that to say this, and I know I feel like I'm rambling, but basically, we're working hard to make sure that we all work hard together to make these problems go away when they pop up.
Great, thank you. And we'll take any questions at this time. Okay, so we have two hands here.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for everything that you and your team does. And my question is, are y'all being protected? Like, is your team being protected? Do you all have like the adequate equipment to make sure that your team's not breathing in these toxins whenever like all of this happens? And if you're able to tell me like who funds it, like are these big entities like Exxon providing stipends for you all to have these like safety equipment to respond to their fires and their mess?
The answer is absolutely. When we communicate with Exxon and go train with Exxon, all that training they provide to us at no cost to the taxpayer. Okay, which is a good thing. All right, and like I said again, they teach us some of the best practices that they have found with dealing with these products. One thing I will tell you is a good hazmat guy understands that he's not a chemist, he's not a scientist, but basically he knows he needs to get intimate with that chemical, whatever that means. And so most of the time we're gonna listen to the product experts based on years of experience of doing emergency response. We're going to evaluate all that information, put it together, and make sure everybody's safe before moving forward with a plan. Thank you for that, because on this incident right here, we had monitors surrounding that area because we were concerned about the safety of, we were concerned with the other pipelines in the area. Let me just say that. And so if there was any issues with flammability or anything like that, we were monitoring for the responders because we'd already evacuated the public out of that area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thank you for that, Richard. This is actually kind of tertiarily related to the question before. You spoke to the importance of partnerships. And so just to be, I guess, clear for me, when the Department of Energy is proposing a lot of these new technologies, kind of novel, sometimes unproven technologies like hydrogen or carbon capture, Are you guys receiving funding from the Department of Energy specifically for updated equipment and training, or is it completely dependent on industry?
No, our teams, most of our FEMA Type 1 teams are receiving, I don't want to sound like they're supporting the whole team, but we do receive grant funds and stuff like that. And occasionally there are things that come through industry. But I hope that answered the question. It's not, everything's not weighted on the taxpayer itself. Plus, what I will tell you for hazmat response, and this may be important to some of y'all and not important to others, but we do have recovery fees for our hazmat response because it's important that the taxpayers do not feel the burden of the response. So we do hold the responsible parties accountable for recovery costs.
Just as a quick follow-up, just because a lot of these technologies are either novel or unproven, is there consultation occurring with DOE and, your guys basically that are first responders? So for example, we have a high velocity hub that's hydrogen, right? And so the regulations and the regulatory oversight hasn't been established yet, as we heard from earlier speakers as well. There's still rulemaking going on, especially when it comes to emergency response specifically. Are you getting consulted? Are your guys getting consulted, the ones that are being asked to go out to the site, in terms of forming best practices for response by the Department of Energy?
Well, so I can't speak directly about the DOE, but what I can tell you is, and I don't want to get off on a rabbit trail, but the big hot thing right now is lithium batteries and stuff like that. So there's a lot of inner workings going on with that. As far as DOE, this is kind of my first exposure with them, but I think basically that's where those relationships start, by that first exposure. So I think things will be good.
If I might, I'd like to tag on to what you just said, Chief. Something that we do at PHMSA is we offer a number of grants. One of those grants specifically is the Pipeline Emergency Responder Grant. And that is a grant that is available to responder services communities where they can buy equipment, they can pay for training, they can do anything to ensure that a responder is capable and qualified to respond to many different types of pipeline incidents. As well, we have hazmat grants that also do the same kind of outreach and help our responder communities. And those grants are issued, I believe, annually and available to anybody to apply that is a qualified entity related to that. One other thing, I know you meant to mention this, is the ERG. We've just issued the new emergency response guidebook, thank you. I couldn't get grant out of my head. The new Emergency Response Guidebook 2024. It's a free download to anybody. It's an app, and all you got to do is go out and look for ERG 2024. You can download it. So when our responder communities show up, our operators even carry these, but when they show up, they have every intimate detail about the product in that line in the palm of their hand. And it spells out what the product is, what the consequences are for that product, what kind of evacuations you might need to do, what distances you need to evacuate, where you should be with respect to the wind, and any other number of things that you need to know regarding the product that's coming out of that line. But that app is free online to anybody. Thanks.
Okay, and I know a number of our questions are focused on the role of DOE. Some of our next speakers are going to be from the DOE, and so we'll get an opportunity to explore their role more. But we do have to continue to move forward with our agenda. So please, I know there are more questions. We want to make sure that we address them all, but we also want to be able to get the right questions to the right folks as well. So I just want to introduce, I believe our next speaker is going to be Gillian Rosen, who's going to be talking about the carbon storage program at DOE.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Gilly. I'm a geologist. I'm gonna talk to you a little bit today about carbon safe and CO2 transport studies that we're doing in FECM. So first, I'm a geologist, okay? I'm outside a lot. I swim, I run, I hike, and what I love to do is figure out how, when I'm swimming or surfing and there's sand all around me, how does that somehow turn into a rock, right? So I spent years and years studying geology, studying glaciers, studying ocean circulation, and studying how the rocks can actually record the story of past climate, which is a fascinating story, and we won't get into it today because we're worried about future climate. But that's where this all started for me. So like Sarah mentioned earlier, in carbon management, there's a number of different components. I'm going to specifically talk about geologic storage. And we have a really great history of geologic storage at DOE. And because we're short on time, I'm going to stick to my notes so I don't get too excited and nerdy on some of the geology stuff. Okay, so at FECM specifically, we have over 20 years experience in carbon storage. We started with research in fundamental science, the basic concepts, and then moved on from there. In the early 2000s, we looked at characterizing the geology and storage potential of different regions around the US and where CO2 emissions were coming from. Then we moved into some small-scale projects, validating regions with the most promising storage opportunities. And then we moved into large-scale projects, which were then conducted to verify risk assessment and mitigation processes. And those projects also included stakeholder engagement, validating monitoring technologies, and optimizing operations. DOE is a research and development organization. We're not the regulators, but we put our funding efforts into looking at what research developments are required to make safe storage. In 2016, FECM launched a program called Carbon Safe, which is what I currently work on. That's Storage Assurance Facility Enterprise. It's our program for commercial scale site characterization, and this is essential in developing future facilities. So the Gulf Coast is a really great region to do this, and as Sue mentioned earlier, there's a lot of reasons. First of all, we have awesome geology here, right? We've got the perfect conditions for some of these storage sites. We also have a lot of CO2 emissions here, right? There's plenty to capture, and we need to figure out where we're gonna put these CO2 emissions. There's also existing infrastructure, and really what I think is most impressive about the Gulf Coast is we have a ton of talented and really experienced professionals who have been working in the subsurface for a really long time. Okay, so I lived in Harris County for 15 years. I've worked with some of the best folks in the industry. People come from around the world to work on geology here, so it's a great place to be. On this map, I've put some of our projects. We have existing CO2 pipelines is the black line. And where you see that blue dashed line, that's where DOE is currently working on a FEED study for future transport solutions. And what a FEED study is, front-end engineering and design. There's no construction involved. We're simply exploring the engineering possibilities for future transport solutions. In purple, those are some shipborne options that we are exploring. So these are just funded studies. Again, nothing is being built at those locations. We're just trying to find solutions. The carbon safe projects are represented as little triangles. Carbon safe projects exist across the US. Since 2016, we've added round after round of new projects, and there's some really exciting developments going on. I'm not going to speak about specific projects because the project performers are much better at that than I am, but they're very exciting. So when we move to kind of develop our knowledge in a specific area, we start in basin-wide scale. Okay, so like I said, that would be like the Gulf Coast region. From there, we focus in, we get more data, and we move to site selection. Then we focus on detailed site characterization, and eventually, we find the sites ready for permitting once we have all of the data. So within Carbon Safe, okay, we have a phased approach. Phase 1 is a pre-feasibility study. It typically takes 12 to 18 months. And that's when you assemble a team and you figure out what the objective is of your project. A phase 2 study is storage complex feasibility. You start to look at existing data. Gulf Coast, because we have such a legacy of rich geologic work going on here, there's a lot of existing data. So you can, just by accessing public data, sometimes start your work. You assemble a team, you start looking at existing core samples. There's lots of core here to look at. And then a phase 3 project is site characterization and permitting. So we focus on developing projects by building out the site characterization, looking at all the geologic data available, and building detailed models of the subsurface, both in a static sense of what's there and also in a dynamic sense and how fluids might behave in the subsurface. And all of these modeling studies are required as part of the EPA permitting process. So a phase 3 carbon safe process will be working towards getting their data ready to submit for their Class 6 permit. Phase 4 is construction. You only get a phase 4 award from DOE if you've met all the requirements along the way, including your permit, including your NEPA, which I'll talk about in a moment. So you can have a phase 2 project having never been a phase 1 project if you come to us with a project that is at that readiness level. And that doesn't mean you have to go on to a phase 3, right? You can then decide to develop a project on your own. But if you are going to develop a phase 3 project with us, these are the requirements along the way. And then you don't get a phase 4 without a permit. That's hands down, that's basically the construction phase, okay? And so during all of these phases, a community benefit plan is required. And Kelly will talk to you about that next. But that is built into the Carbon Safe project. So I'm going to try and keep this brief because I am not a NEPA expert, and we are short on time. But NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. Anytime a federal agency is going to act, you need to do environmental studies, okay? And there are many points along the way where there is opportunity for public comment. DOE has a NEPA division that handles this, and I'm not going to pretend to be a part of that. I'm just a geologist, okay? But for something that's a paper study, there's going to be little impact on the environment, so that's a pretty low bar to cross for an environmental study. The more that's involved, the more field work that's involved, you have to provide lots of information to get a NEPA decision. And so, again, there's multiple steps along the way where this needs to be taken into consideration. You get, often extensive volumes of data are involved in this, and depending on the potential impacts that are being assessed, this can take anywhere from another 1 to 2 years. I'm going to spare you some of the details because it's getting late. But again, basically, it's a long process, and when you get through this whole stage, again, nothing is done until the award. Nothing is actually done out in the environment until these decisions are made, and nothing with federal funding can be done without a NEPA decision. So I'll leave it at that, and then I think we've got one more speaker before we get to questions. Okay.
That is correct. Awesome. Thank you so much, Gilly. All right, next we're going to hear from John Brown, who is representing DOE's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, also known as OSAD.
Hey, everybody. You guys still awake out there? Okay. It's hard to be the closer in this room. Let's see. I'm John Brown. I'm with the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. I'm a third-generation energy guy. My grandfather grew up in Austin. He went to UT Austin. I know I probably just lost half to the room. Sorry, Aggies. And he worked in the oil and gas industry for 45 years. My father worked as a mechanical engineer. He worked on nuclear power plants. And then he also worked in renewable energy. He was part of the first original Department of Energy in 1977 that was created under the Carter administration when we had a oil crisis. He actually put the first solar panels on the White House. So I can literally say I've been talking about energy my whole life. I like to consider myself a community connector. I live in Denver, Colorado with Amber and my dog, Henry. He's a Pyrenees and Coonhound dog mix. I love all the outdoor life. I've had a very interesting career. It's always been on the regulatory, government affairs, community affairs. That's why I call myself a community connector. I've always been working on public-private partnerships, but it really has run the gamut, and this has been global. And what I can tell you is that every community right now, what we have to focus on is the food, energy, water nexus. You know, they all are interdependent. And so I look that way. I think about the circular economy, and I think about those kind of solutions. So I just want you to know that when we approach these projects at the Department of Energy, we are thinking very inclusively and pragmatically. We're partnering with the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture, and across local and state government. So OCID was created in 2021. Congress mandated the creation of our programming based on the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we were given $25 billion to explore a variety of solutions to solve America's energy problems. Not one solution will do the trick. We're proud to say since 2021, we've helped create 400,000 clean energy jobs for America through American businesses. We've also are on target right now by the end of 2024 to install 38 gigawatts of solar energy. That will double our one-year target ever. So it's a new history target. We are investing in energy storage. We've also, and other systems that have actually helped for over 900 American manufacturing clean energy facilities to be promised to come online. That's going to help us increase our domestic solar panel production by 600%, and also our own battery and lithium production, so we can all do this at home for Americans. I'm going to focus today on the carbon management program because, you know, that's the focus of the projects we have in this community. So in this management, we have three parts of that. We have the carbon capture demonstration projects. These are large-scale projects like the Baytown project that you might have heard of. The second are called large-scale pilot projects. And the third is regional direct air capture. And that's where you're putting up big machines that can suck CO2 directly out of the air. The first two are point source, right? We're attached to the emissions source. OCED in this fiscal year, which just closed September 30th, we selected over 100 projects for negotiation. We have closed or gone to award with about 50% of those at the close of the fiscal year. They run the gamut. Those are color-coded. You can go to our website, and this is an interactive map where you can learn about these projects. Here's a little snapshot of kind of what's going on in your neighborhood. You guys know a lot about some of these projects. I'm going to focus in on just three as examples to keep this fast. Again, the first one is the Baytown carbon capture project. The goal is to capture up to 2 million metric tons from that facility. They do plan to transport and store it somewhere in the Gulf Coast. Those plans are still in development. The federal cost share for this program is up to $270 million. We, just this summer, gave them their first phase component of that funding. It was $12.5 million. So they're working on the early stage, what's called a FEED study, front-end engineering and design. It's really a sophisticated desktop study where you're doing computer modeling and taking, kind of like a comprehensive technical report that helps you do the financial, environmental, social, and environmental aspects to know if a project has the potential to proceed forward. And that's also included with the NEPA process. The second project that you guys might have heard about is ExxonMobil. This one is under negotiation, so I can't say a lot. It is connected to them converting an existing facility to do hydrogen fuel production. Part of what you've described as the hydrogen hub. We want to share more. We're trying. There's probably a room full of lawyers about the size of this that are trying to negotiate, and you can imagine with all the parties involved, what can they say and not say? We understand the tension of it being a public, public funding that you deserve to know, but there's also a business opportunity here, right? And so there's a balance between sharing what we can now in an early stage development, but protecting the intellectual property of the players involved. And unfortunately, this has been more complicated than we had hoped, but we promise we will share more when we can. The third one is a gas production. This is BSAF, where we're going to help decarbonize some of their manufacturing process to make that less carbon intensive. It's way above my pay grade, but their hope is to reduce their carbon emissions by 75% on that project. I wanted to mention, we weren't able to, someone was asking, what is DOE's, total target for CO2 capture? I don't have that number for you, but what I do have is that our goal, our stretch goal, right, is to, by 2030, make the United States 80% clean energy and have a 40% reduction in total carbon emissions. And tomorrow's carbon report that was coming out will probably detail how we think carbon capture, carbon removal, and other carbon management technologies help us get to that 40% reduction by 2030. It was discussed earlier, how are we approaching the project? It's a phased approach to project management. OSID is taking a very hands-on approach. It's really side by side. We have engineers and other technical experts that are working. I've spent the last 9 months, so like for instance on the Baytown project, we initiated negotiations starting in January. We completed them over the summer. We went through very detailed plans of looking at their project management plan, and we specified very specific terms and conditions to the award funding of certain milestones that have to be reached. Like I said, so for phase one, they got 12.5 million. They have to come up with the other half, and we'll be watching. When they reach the end of phase one and there's the evaluation period, there are very specified terms and milestones that have to be reached for us to provide the next phase of funding. Each of these stage gates also include community engagement. So you're going to have an opportunity to know what we know at that point. And like I said, when we complete the FEED study, the technical and the environmental assessment of NEPA, we'll have a lot more clarity on exactly what this project is and how it will impact you. And if we all feel comfortable that we feel good about that they should move forward, we will take your community input to help them to make that decision. The last slide, and Kelly, you're next, right? So I'm not going to steal your thunder, but all these projects require a community benefits plan. And the plan is really just how they're going to engage with you. But then what we want is the outcome to be agreements, binding legal agreements that are right sized for your community, that address the needs of this community. And so we don't prescribe a certain way, but we have some best practices. I know with the Baytown project, they will have a community advisory board. So there will be community voices that are helping to shape the direction of the project. And there's these four critical areas that Kelly will go into, so I will let her describe that. That's all I have.
Okay, questions for John or Gilly?
I'm Exxon's direct neighbor, and I don't know of any kind of community plan that they've done or they presented, or there's anything that's been out there to communicate with me. And I'm an active member of the community.
Yeah.
And so that's one piece, is to know what that community advisory panel looks like. And all those stages that you had, we're already well into those stages. So how is that happening, and what is their obligation to let us know how to communicate with them?
Yeah, thank you for that question. For the ExxonMobil project that is connected to the DOE funding from my office, they are in current negotiations. So they haven't executed any of their community plan as it's related to this award. I can't speak to their current community engagement, other than I did meet one of their community liaisons last night, and we did have a nice conversation about, what they do. And I know that they're out in the community. I know, like you said, you just heard from the fire department that they are doing engagement. But in terms of the specific project here, that engagement will commence once they are under award. Right now it's negotiation phase. But to even in their application process, they submitted a plan of how they would engage under the award.
Hi, I am also Exxon's direct neighbor and have suffered the health implications of everything that they have done. And we are actually currently in a lawsuit with the city of Baytown. And I mean, this is just a repeated pattern, like she mentioned, where there's lack of transparency. They are not in the community engaging at all. Like I said, I am also less than a mile away. Just because you have a nice conversation with someone doesn't mean that they're doing their actual job. So I guess my question is how are y'all already in negotiations without there being any community input if there's already some type of public funding into these projects? And there's a follow-up question. Thank you.
Okay. So when they do submit their application and their community benefits plan, it does outline the work that they have done, which includes a level of community engagement. I was not involved on that negotiation. I don't know what that looked like, but it is a requirement to reach this stage. I'm sorry that they didn't reach your community or you didn't become aware, but the documentation that we received during application, and we have independent merit reviewers who review the applications that have a broad perspective of experience, both technical and social and community. And they felt it was satisfactory. So I apologize that it didn't meet your needs, and I can get you more information if we want to stay in contact about what type of engagement they did prior to getting selected for negotiation.
I guess my question is, what do you all consider community engagement? Because they can go into their employees and be fill out this survey, and this is community engagement. We see this with TxDOT, we see this with other entities. What is considered to you community engagement?
It's a great question. I'm going to save it for Kelly because she's going to go into detail on that. So I just want you, because we're short on time, and I'll take one more question from you. But
I'm sorry, I wasn't done. The last question was, who approves the NEPA? Is it the NEPA review? Is it the federal government, or do they have self-assignment? How does this work?
So the NEPA review is not a permitting process. What the NEPA review is a rigorous environmental assessment that then has a recommendation. And and there's different levels of report, and I'm not a NEPA expert, but there's different levels of that report, and it's based on what the risk assessment is. But it basically evaluates whether or not the project meets certain criteria where the benefits of the project are greater than the potential environmental impact. And if it reaches that threshold, it gets a recommendation, but it's not a permit or an approval. It's just a report. So again, I'm not a NEPA expert, and we can get you into contact in that process. I don't want to take too much more time on this, but once the report is done, it's published for public comment, and anybody from any walk of life or expertise has 30 days or 60 days to then critique the report and look at it and give it a thorough review. And then after that public comment period, it is reviewed and then revised based on feedback. And I'm going to take one more question. I think we should cut it off. And also, I appreciate you're very active, but in the terms of equity, can we also make sure that other voices get heard tonight? But I'll take your question if you want. You get your hand up, but then I really want Kelly to get on.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for taking the question, John.
Yeah.
So I think that first and foremost, the concern that I brought up earlier with the GAO report about FECM isn't really addressed by what you stated in terms of risk assessments not actually being adhered to by that specific office. But additionally, I'm concerned by this. You use the word nexus, right? You stressed the importance of the nexus when it comes to food, water, energy, all of these things. So, we're treating carbon capture right now in a siloed position, but the DOE doesn't. It's part of their energy earthshot, right? So that includes CCS, hydrogen, plastics to fuels or other resources to fuels, right? And so holding a community meeting without also including all the different mechanisms that all of this feeds into is a little disingenuous, first and foremost. Secondly, I would like to address the fact when we're speaking about NEPA, that's the only formalized process currently that the public has to actually have their comment recorded in this process, whether it's for carbon capture, sequestration, hydrogen, or any of the other technologies, many unproven, that we've seen. The very first presenter actually had a photo standing in front of Petronova, a facility that recently reopened, but that had to close down. It opened in 2017 and closed down. DOE lost $195 million on that. You have a GAO report that's less than a year old that says that the sponsoring office in DOE for this current meeting right now misappropriated that money and did not follow guidelines that were already on the books. And when you stated that you've updated these policies, that's fine, but if you have updated policies that offices within DOE are not doing, then that's troubling. And I haven't seen any kind of increase in transparency, whether it's hydrogen or this. Additionally, I'd like to point out that Susie Baker, who's a point person for the hydrogen high velocity hub, said that the decarbonization efforts for the olefins plant at ExxonMobil aren't part of the hydrogen hub. So I'm not sure if there's an internal misunderstanding or not. I'm not sure, but that's concerning. Finally, I would like to say this, and DOE needs to hear this. Decarbonizing technologies are great to meet climate goals, but here, the largest petrochemical complex in the world after Belgium, Antwerp, and Rotterdam, right? All you're doing is decarbonizing the creation of other poisons. So if you're decarbonizing an olefins plant to create things like benzene, 1,3-butadiene, and other cancer-causing, endocrine-disrupting chemicals, that's inherently problematic. But at the end of the day, there is a lack of transparency here, and I don't need to hear about community benefit plans. That's the third step. You first need to get consent to put additional pipelines and additional infrastructure into our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just close. I just want to clarify something. What you talked about talking to Susie. What I was describing is there is a there's a group of named entities that are part of the hydrogen hub. What I'm saying is ExxonMobil, obviously, when these projects get developed, it's a regional play. So I think both are true, right? They're looking to convert hydrogen. There's going to be talk about creating a hydrogen ecosystem here. But they're not part of that award package, right? So I apologize for that. But they're all in the same region, and that's the way those ecosystems are being developed, right? That you have regional players that are going to work together. Okay, I want to thank you, everybody, and I'm going to let you turn over to you. And then,
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. No, I appreciate it, everyone. And obviously, there are many more topics than we have the opportunity to discuss tonight, but we will brush up against the limitations of the venue and the timing for today. So I do want to introduce Kelly, who is going to be speaking next about community benefits plans from FECM's perspective. All right. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for your questions. I just want to say that this is recorded. We will share the slides, and I'd love, if there are questions that we don't have an answer to, the GAO question, let's follow up. I'd like to give you my card, and we'll make sure that we find the answers that you're looking for. My name is Kelly Romer, and I'm also going to stick to my notes just for the sake of time. But I support the implementation of the Community Benefit Plan guidance for the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. I'm on the engagement team, and my goal is to set the stage for the next conversation that features local voices about what community benefits should look like here. First, I want to am I in the way? I can make sure that you can see this. I want to just start by clarifying a few terms that often are interchanged, but are related and describe two different tools for delivering community benefits. So we have community benefit plans and community benefit agreements. So when we talk about community benefit plans, these are specific requirements for the Department of Energy projects. These plans are submitted with the application materials and explain how a project will engage community and labor stakeholders, and will address the community benefit plan for priority areas, which I'll dig into in just a moment. Formal community and workforce agreements, such as community benefit agreements, are encouraged as a possible outcome of community benefit plan commitments and activities. But these are distinct because they are negotiated legal agreements between a project developer and local coalitions, local groups, labor organizations. These agreements often outline roles, responsibilities, and identify mechanisms for delivering community benefits that are legally binding and enforceable. So we can dig into these a little bit more. So community benefit plans, like I mentioned, are a set of plans to address social impacts of DOE-funded projects. These plans are submitted as part of an application alongside technical elements that Gilly described earlier. These are scored in merit review as part of, by both internal and external experts with subject matter expertise in energy and environmental justice, community engagement, labor issues, and DEIA. So typically these plans represent up to 20% of the overall score of an application. So this means that the quality of these plans are really important for funding decisions. Someone mentioned, how are these plans monitored, enforced? Projects are required to submit reporting, metrics, and tracking of the progress towards their commitments. We also, in FECM, conduct assistance and validation meetings where we meet multiple times throughout a project period to see how a project is progressing throughout the goal. We also take feedback from community. Please, connect with us through the FECM engagement email. We work to respond and try to hear folks out, and so we can hear about issues as they arise. These plans, once they are awarded, are published on DOE websites. Happy to share that link for the FECM projects. So what's actually in these plans? Community benefit plans must address the 4 priority areas that John showed the slide of. They need to describe plans to conduct early and robust engagement with community and labor stakeholders. They need to describe the engagement that has already been conducted to date to inform the plan. And they also need to identify who they will talk to once that plan is awarded, with specific stakeholders and folks listed. They also needed to describe how they will approach developing high-quality jobs and invest in workforce development, as well as advance diverse and equitable participation in employment and other economic opportunities. They will also describe how they will implement the Justice 40 initiative to ensure that project benefits are directed to disadvantaged communities and impacts are mitigated. So as Gilly noted in the slide with the carbon safe phases on it, the community benefit plan framework is applied across technology types and phases of development. Community benefit plan activities, a lot like the technical elements of these projects, are intended to build on the work from previous phases and also lay the groundwork for future phases. So what community benefit plans and some of those early phase projects that are pre-construction look like? They are outlining how they will dedicate time, resources, identify the appropriate personnel with the expertise to actually be successful in doing that engagement. They will establish two-way mechanisms for soliciting community input. Many of, as John mentioned, we do see community advisory boards that are being developed, and this is distinct from some of the practices that I know are already happening here, but we could talk more about what those look like. It's also important that this work happens early in the development phases, because those strong agreements that reflect authentic partnerships and community priorities take a lot of time and engagement and negotiation to develop. So before I move on, I just want to talk specifically about the Justice 40 initiative and what it means for community benefit plans. So the Justice 40 initiative is a policy that directs 40% of overall benefits of certain federal investments to flow to disadvantaged communities. All of the U.S. Department of Energy's carbon management projects are covered under the Justice 40 initiative. These benefits that are really specific priorities under energy and environmental justice focus on decreasing energy burden and environmental exposure, increasing access to economic opportunities, and increasing environmental and energy resilience. So what this looks like within the plan itself is that every application and community benefit plan must have a Justice 40 plan that includes a description of all communities that could experience project impacts, including an energy and environmental justice assessment that identifies the cumulative burdens already experienced by these communities. And to support the development and analysis and consistency of those assessments, the DOE has developed the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool to identify 36 indicators at the census tract level for environmental and climate, as well as socioeconomic burdens. We also recommend the EPA's EJ Screen tool that could be useful, as well as state and other tools to make sure that that assessment is robust and thorough. And so in addition to identifying those impacted communities and understanding the cumulative burdens and making sure that's integrated into the site assessment and project analysis, the Justice 40 section needs to describe the potential benefits and how those will flow to specific communities at that census tract level, as well as how those potential impacts will be mitigated. So that's an important part of the plan, and it's represents a major shift in how DOE is thinking about funding these projects. So now that we talked about community benefit plans, let's dig into community and workforce agreements. While these agreements are between projects and communities, they're not required by DOE as a contingent part of DOE funding. They are strongly encouraged and seen as a gold standard outcome of community benefit plan activities, in which we want to see how those commitments are formalized into these legal negotiated agreements that will ensure that the benefits and terms of engagement will continue long after DOE's role in the project as a funder are gone. So there are several types of agreements to meet different needs, in addition to CBAs, good neighbor agreements, project labor agreements, and community workforce agreements. So often these agreements articulate those roles and responsibilities, processes for soliciting community input, sharing information or data, how different activities will be monitored, workforce development and job standards, local investments in community infrastructure, community funds, and also revenue sharing opportunities. So I just wanted to share an example of a recent community benefit agreement that was part of a carbon management project. This is not a DOE funded project, this is not an endorsement of the project, but I think it's really useful to be able to see what these agreements look like. The agreement is for the Trailblazer carbon dioxide pipeline in Nebraska. This pipeline recently received permission from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to transition the pipeline to carry and transport carbon dioxide from ethanol plants to underground sequestration. Tallgrass Energy entered a community benefit and dividend agreement in April with Bold Alliance. This is a coalition of organizations across the region. It's also endorsed by 11 organizations that represent agricultural producers and first responders in the area. So this agreement had 3 priority areas outlined: landowner protection, public safety, and community investment. This CBA establishes provisions for landowners to receive an annual royalty, as well as a initial endowment for a community foundation, and a royalty every year based on the amount of carbon dioxide the project sequesters. The CBA provides additional funding for first responder equipment, training, improvement of a regional public safety alert system, strategy for continuous engagement with local emergency planning committees, and importantly, this agreement outlines terms for communication with landowners and what to do if a conflict or a deviation arises, and options for decommissioning once the pipeline is no longer needed. So again, this isn't a DOE project, but I think it's useful of the type of agreements that reflect local concerns and priorities. That we'd like to see these types of agreements formalized as outcomes of the community benefit plans. So this actual agreement is QR code linked here. I think it's useful to read them, have them be publicly available. The slides are linked that would take you to Bold Alliance's page so you can hear their perspective on how they approached the negotiation process. So as I conclude, I just want to talk about a few relevant initiatives led by the DOE that speak to some of this conversation that we're having. So first, I wanted to mention the Responsible Carbon Management Initiative, which is a DOE initiative that aims to encourage project developers and others in the industry to pursue the highest levels of safety, environmental stewardship, accountability, community engagement, and social benefits for projects. FECM launched this initiative in August of last year. We solicited public comment through a request for information where we received over 80 comments that were thoughtfully written with substantial recommendations for how these principles could be improved and strengthened. This feedback was reviewed and synthesized and integrated into these principles. At the same time, from some of these comments and other resources, developed a set of guidance best practices. So we hope that this set of standards that is informed by public comment can speak to projects outside of DOE's span of control, extend as what best practice looks like for all projects that are being deployed. Lastly, I'd like to speak, we've heard of a lot about carbon management projects, but there are a lot of DOE investments happening in this region, all with community benefit requirements, especially, Texas and Louisiana. There are a lot of things happening. We know that it is a lot of work from the community perspective to be able to track and stay up to date on what's going on. And in response to this need, an initiative led by the Office of Energy, Justice, and Equity and supported by the offices that have projects in this region is the Regional Energy Democracy Initiative, which aims to provide that stakeholder and community support to better understand community benefit plans, what are the projects happening in the region, how to keep track of them, and to provide that technical support and capacity, especially around developing those advisory boards and community benefit agreements. This consortium has not been announced yet. Please stay tuned for some exciting announcement. There will be the consortia will be led by a university in the area with legal support, local labor experts, and community organization representatives from different areas throughout this region. So what it aims to do and provide as a service is to be able to track the suite of DOE investments, develop a regional benefit strategy that characterize the concerns and context of the region and identifies the priorities from the community perspective themselves. Also hold convenings and provide that technical support and capacity. So this QR code will also take you to that. Several resources from the DOE side, more information about community benefit plans, One opportunity to be involved in the community benefit plan process is to be a merit reviewer. This QR code, you can link and submit your application to participate as a reviewer on a range of DOE programs. There's also resources on community benefit agreements. Beyond DOE, there's a growing community of practice around community benefit agreements, developing tools and resources, and I'm happy to share more examples and direct you to some of those if that is useful. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. My email is there, my colleague Haley, to speak to the Responsible Carbon Management Initiative.
I'm looking at, and I don't know if the next step is going to come up with this community benefits panel
Mm-hmm.
that comes up next. This is kind of our area, so I don't know if this is specific to the people that are working on an Exxon project, but there's no one here that represents Baytown in terms of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how you form a community benefits panel that doesn't include the neighbors, okay? So thank you for this information,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll follow through and whatever.
Yeah.
But the impact and the direct impact of what we feel and what we experience and all of that has to be taken into consideration. This isn't just about jobs. This is about what happens in our area and with our neighbors.
Perfect, thank you. And I think folks heard that, but that was speaking to the next panel on community benefits. And this panel was developed through an advisory board to speak broadly about what the range of possibility is around here. It wasn't specific to a project. Would like to, follow up more on that specifically, but thank you.
Okay, and at this time, we are going to introduce Sunrisa Lucera, who is going to moderate the community benefits panel, which will include our final Q&A session. Okay, thank you. We're going to integrate the questions into the Q&A related to the panel as well.
I'll stick around for that and can chime in if useful.
Okay, awesome, great, thank you.
So we're going to take questions at the end of the panel, and so hold on to that page. We're going to take questions at the end of the panel, and so bring it back up in just a few. Okay, hey everybody, it's been a long night so far. Is everyone still with me and awake? Could we get like a, woo! It's been a long day, right? Maybe like, let's stretch out because we're going to have some community members come up and some other folks from here locally, and I'd like to invite our panelists on up. And so I want to make sure that we're awake and alive for this last conversation. There's no PowerPoints in this one. It's just a conversation with Denver community members. Thank you. All right, so come on up, folks. And then you got extra mics, right? All right. I'm sorry? All right, awesome. Great. All right, hello everybody. I'm Sunrisa Lucero. I'm in our Office of Energy, Justice, and Equity at the Department of Energy. I'm really excited to be a part of this tonight, and I'm amazed at y'all's dedication and persistence to be here and to give up so much of your evening. I really appreciate that, and to hang in with us all evening. I'm even more excited about our panelists who've been taking time out of their day. And actually, even Dominic has been with, and Randy too, have been with us last night as well. And I think you're coming with us tomorrow as well. So there's been a lot of dedication on our panelists here to be able to share this information with all of you. I do want to, so first I'm going to say who couldn't be here today. So we also had Mr. Ibrahim Eslami from the Houston Advanced Research Center, who wasn't able to join us tonight last minute due to some travel challenges that he had. But we're still strong here with our other panelists. We have Dominic Chacon from the Texas Campaign for the Environment. We have Randy Harris from La Una. And we have Terrence Narcisse. Did I say it right? Terrence, all right, with East Harris County Empowerment Council. Because we're a little bit short on time, I'm not going to have everyone do their own individual introductions right now because I want to kind of get down and into it. But I'm hoping by your answers, you'll be letting people know who you are in the room and in the space, right? And so we'll get in that way. In the last presentation, there were several main points that we kind of heard, right? That community benefit plans are DOE's method for trying to help identify any types of harms or harms or disbenefits that would go into a community, and how a project would be addressing those, how they're engaging with communities and how they feel about the projects themselves, how they are identifying and co-developing benefits with the community, and how they're making sure that they're helping these projects benefit communities that have been underserved and overburdened over time. And so I kind of want to pick up there maybe first, or kind of pick up on those themes if we can. We've heard a lot tonight about concerns that community members have about these projects, and I'm a little curious from our panelists' perspective, like what is it that you're seeing that these projects need to make sure that they have in order to be protective of health and safety when they're entering into a community? Dominic, do you want to start?
Hello, everybody. My name is Dominic. I think first off, to answer that question, we need to really establish what community engagement is. To your question, thank you for pointing that out. When I was invited here to speak on the panel, I had to make it really clear, and I still feel the need to make it really clear. Just because I'm here representing a community organization in Texas does not mean I consent to this process, to the plan that's been laid out, to any of the ideas. I have been a part of too many community engagement events like this that co-opt any presence of community member to say, we did it, congratulations. In a population of Harris County, 4.8 million people, no researcher, no expert would say that this is a representative sample of the region, period. That should not be a contradicting or offensive statement, right? This is no disrespect to the DOE and the people who have been doing the work. This is just an acknowledgement that this is not enough. This is not community engagement. Community engagement is prior and informed community consent. This is not that. Okay, so if we want to have a good faith conversation, an honest conversation, right? I want to believe everybody that's come up here to express their concern about this environmental crisis. I want to believe in good faith that our geologists and our scientists are wanting to get community engagement, but I'm not seeing any notes being taken, right? I'm not seeing any questions from community being really considered. What I'm seeing is community being spoken to, right? What I'm seeing is community being told, these are the projects that are happening. How much do you want? Which one of your groups should get a grant, right? Which one of your organizations would be happy to receive money from the DOE to sign off on these projects? That is not acceptable. We need to demand more, and we deserve more. I want to say this in good faith, right? I'm not trying to chew anybody out. I'm not trying to drag anybody, but better is possible. But in order for that to be a case, we have to really ask ourselves, what is community engagement? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to thank all the presenters tonight have done a really great job, and everybody, the last two nights, really, it's been a great, this has really been a good time for me, and just a good to get to see folks and everybody else. And as you heard, I'm with the Laborers International Union of North America. We represent about 540,000 workers in the U.S. and Canada. I don't know that I agree with Dominic's take on this, that this is this the only thing? I don't think this is the only thing. I think this is part of a process. To say that you've got to talk to all, to your point, 4.8 million people in the county, I don't think that's a reasonable question. I think these are the kinds of things where we start off, right? These are when we're talking to groups, when we're starting these conversations. I agree that the DOE and everybody should do more. I mean, I think everybody agrees with that. I do believe that this has all been done in good faith. I don't think, at least from my perspective, I'm only speaking for myself, and I think from the labor end of this, that people aren't being spoken to, at least we don't feel that way. There is a dialogue. There is a conversation. It is a two-way conversation. And I've seen the folks here tonight doing the presentations take a very active approach to trying to answer some of these questions and to try to get you some answers and to talk after this meeting about what they can do next. I think meetings like this are tough, right? It's tough to get into deep conversations and get all the questions answered. We're limited by time, and we're limited by scope and what certain folks can and cannot talk about. But what does community, and I guess going back to what does community outreach look like? How do we ensure that people are heard? I think meetings like this, I think these are really good opportunities. I think being informed is also a two-way street. I think the community has an obligation to be out front and looking to be informed and looking to ask questions and not sit and say, well, nobody told me. I mean, I think this goes both ways on these things. I think we've got to be out front, which is where you've got to be very active. And you've got a nice group of folks here tonight that are active, and you know, applause to all of you for coming tonight. This is great to come out, to get involved in these kinds of things, because this is how you make change. I mean, you know, I know I probably can't get into politics, but we've got an election in less than 30 days. And these are the kinds of things that happen when people show up. And so you got to show up. You've got to be involved. You've got to be willing to be involved. And my organization, we try to get folks like myself, and we've got a couple of my colleagues in the room here that work with the laborers. We've got some building trades folks here. We elect leaders, and we elect members, and we elect people to try to gain knowledge on our behalf. And then we try to share that and take what our membership thinks and what folks think and bring that to other folks like that have been here tonight from the DOE and the EPA that are the folks that makes the decisions and makes recommendations on other people's behalf. And so I think we've got to understand and accept our country is a representative democracy, and we do a lot of this. So I do think these meetings are very helpful. I think, yeah, absolutely. Should there be more? Should there be a little bit more done? Yes. But it's also incumbent upon the community to be active and being out and going out and finding out what you all want to know. Because to your point, I agree with you on this. I'm sorry, and this is my last point. I agree with you that this is not a representative opinion of what I think folks maybe here in the county or the region think. It's a very limited opinion of what a certain very activist group think. And we sometimes we lose the forest for the trees when we do those things. But the people that show up are the ones that make the decisions.
So Terrence, we kind of put a lot of different conversations on the table here, which is good because it makes sense. We've had a varied conversation throughout the day. So I know when you and I were talking a little bit earlier, there was a lot that you were saying about proper engagement, and also maybe some enthusiasm for some of the benefits that could actually come into from these projects, or hope maybe for what could actually become from these projects. Anything you want to comment there?
Good afternoon, evening, everyone. My name is Terrence Narcissus, founder and CEO of East Harris County Empowerment Council. We're a local nonprofit organization that helps the unincorporated parts of Harris County, specifically the communities of Channelview, Crosby, Galena Park, North Shore, Jacinto City, and Sheldon, partake in the engagement process and looking for opportunity. Being from an unincorporated part that's so close to Houston, there is a tremendous amount of blessings of being so close to local municipal governments like Houston. But there's also a piece that comes to where Ms. Teresa was talking about from the people from Baytown, of just thinking about what does community actually mean? And so when you think about engaging Houston, that looks a little bit different than engaging Exxon's neighbor subdivision. Could you tell us the subdivision where you live? Country Club Oaks. So thinking about Country Club Oaks and community engagement for an area like Country Club Oaks or XYZ subdivision looks different than engaging here tonight. By a quick show of hands, how many people here are here tonight that are employed by the United States federal government? Please raise your hand. Hi. Can we get them high? Okay. How many people here are in the local government? I see some local government folks. Our local government folks are here. How many people are from state government? It's okay. What about community members, actual residents of the community? Raise your hands high. Yeah, just you where you live. You are a neighbor and you are here either by a community group or a concerned citizen. Okay, but you're okay. So you're a neighbor. So what I'm saying is that to your point, that this is how we all come together and decide. And I have had the luxury of seeing some of our federal partners from local events that you all have had all across the country. And one thing that I continue to see is the lack of trust between all parties involved. And so there may be an issue with the local government not trusting the state not the federal, the residents not trusting these people. And it's just this vicious cycle I don't personally believe that's taking us anywhere. And even thinking about community benefits agreements, and I've sat on panels and I've been interviewed, asked about best practices. And what I've come to the sad conclusion is that everyone, when they speak about community, they're thinking about something different than the actual what it actually is. When I think about community engagement, I'm thinking about the people in places where people lived and they are not being heard or they are not being listened to. Places like East Harris County, and I'd imagine there are a lot of communities here that are representative of East Harris County, and even thinking about what the federal government is trying to do, the whole idea behind the environmental justice initiative by this current administration was looking at disadvantaged communities. And so many of the projects that are going out are made possible by the community being disadvantaged. And so even to sit here today and hear that the community is continuing still to be disadvantaged, there's something off. And then also learning the difference between a community benefit plan of what we're proposing to do, and then also thinking about what a community benefits agreement is. And we talked about this at the National Academies of Engineering and Mathematics, had a conference that I spoke at, but just thinking about what it actually takes for the community to get organized, because my question leaving here tonight is, who is the community and who is the community spokesperson? And so we think about a community group like mine, we're not elected by anybody. It's a nonprofit organization of citizens coming together to say we want more for our community. Are we the community signatory, or is it a labor union like yours and thinking about the labor community? And so just really getting clear, I think there needs to be some clarity around how we articulate the word community and the word engagement, because when I think about engagement, when someone is proposing to be married, they get down on one knee and they make a lifelong commitment to that individual. And so when you think about engagement from that standpoint, it's kind of like we talked about earlier. It's a random guy. You're going through the airport and there's a random guy that walks up and says, "Hey, can you hold my bag? I'll give you $1,000. And the first thing that most people would say in that scenario would be, it would be no. So why would you say no, sir? Why would you say no? You don't know what's in the bag. Why would you say no, ma'am? Exactly. So that's what it's like when companies do community engagement to communities. They come in with this awesome idea and say, just hold this right here. And then the community doesn't know what the actual opportunity is. And so my premise is there can be no engagement until there is authentic education of the people that live in those places that have been disadvantaged, because the whole point of them being disadvantaged is that this process hasn't been going on with them for years. And so just thinking about how we articulate what engagement is at the expense of community investment, because even when companies make dollars available to communities, that's community investment. That is a part of engagement, but it could also be outreach as well.
So, no, thank you for saying that. I think speaking as an engagement professional at DOE, this has been a really big challenge. I've been working down here in Texas and Louisiana for the last 2.5 years, and have made some actually great relationships with folks that are here from that work. But it's very difficult. Some of our approach in our office has very much been trying to do some of the tops organizing, because we have limited resources and can't go, do the door-to-door organizing. READY is a big, which we heard about earlier, the Regional Energy Democracy Initiative is a big response to that, and we hope to have good news about that any week now. and we had, and to FECM's big credit, yay FECM, wherever you are back there, they did local planning committees for these events, and they broke this up from just being a one-time engagement to 3 that we're doing last night, tonight, and tomorrow night in each of these different communities to try and bring it more local. But I know we need help because, this room, we could try and fill it 2-3 times over. But I think also a challenge is that, at this point, it's very technical, as we heard tonight. It's very long, just even get your brain around it to understand it. And these are non-project specific, right? And so when it's not site specific, it's not project specific, it can be very difficult to capture people's attention for all the competing priorities in anybody's life, especially during election season, right? But I kind of want to turn some of that question back to you all. Like, what is the best way to capture that attention? How do you get consent? Who is the one that actually gets to give consent in a way that like a federal government employee can say, okay, that's the person I go talk to get consent. And it's like, I can't just, I know it'd just be like, hey, just me, I get to say yes. But like, who should be that body? Is it the elected officials? Is it the chambers? Is it the unions? Is it community-based organizations? How does that actually work? And like, who do you bring in? Or, Randy, in your case, like, what's the best way to access to your members? Or how do you get your local hires and get local people invested into these things? And then after we kind of get through these comments here, I want to turn it out to the audience. So let's see what we can do, and then we'll open it up a little bit. Who wants to start? Whoever feels good and ready to go. All right, Dominic.
I think it goes back to that fundamental question of who is community, right? And one of the questions I'm coming up or hitting with community benefits agreement is why would we have just one, right? There's workers that have really specific project labor agreements that they want to see. They should have their own CBA, right? And it should be a coalition of labor. Same thing for public health interests, right? There's so many things, public health, short-term, long-term, vulnerable populations. So there potentially should be a CBA for public health needs explicitly, right? And so there's all kinds of things we could do to make sure different pockets of communities are represented. But I think generally, if you have Harris County has 4.8 million, the consent isn't, you need to get consent from 4.8 million, but you need to figure out what is a representative sample, right? Make sure that the women are represented, the proper demographics, the proper cities, and those are all foundational framework things that need to be established first. Right? We can't say, hey, we're thinking about community benefits agreements. What do you think? We're going to kind of roll them out. I think it's incumbent upon these agencies and these industries to really lay out the foundation. Another thing is when we're talking about safety, last night in last night's meeting, hearing the industry and agencies talk about safety, it's almost exclusively safety in the legal terms, right? How do we legally define safety? But when public interest and community are having these conversations, safety has a really different meaning. It has to do with their health and their environment and water. And so it's hard for me to see how we can bridge that gap until we have a strong foundation and framework that we can all collectively have that good faith conversation,
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's how much are these projects? $100 billion or something? That's the $100 billion question. To Terrence's point about who is the community, and I think Dominic hits it as well. I've got a little experience with this process, and not exactly this, but to your point about the community benefits agreements, generally speaking, they're multifaceted. So there's not just an agreement that says one thing. It does address many of those various communities, because that, to your point, you're right. Community is I don't think there is a community in the sense that when we're talking about this, that there's one thing and you go to this group and boom, you're done. Many of us are parts of many different communities. Whether that be from and I am not, full disclosure, I do not live in Texas, but whether that means you're a local resident and also a union worker and also a parent of a child in a school that lives near the one of these facilities. I mean, those are different, the same person in 3 different communities, and then it's up to these individuals, which one of those communities do they put the most stock in, and getting consent from all three. And sometimes is, I'm talking in a big circle and I'm rambling a little bit because I don't know the right answer to your question that you go, this is the person. I think, Dominic hits it there that it's a big county and you get representatives from everyone. And Terrence said he's not elected, but you're certainly appointed or been chosen by your group of constituents. And whether we like that or not, we like to frame it that way. That's what I think people understand is you've got and elected officials have constituents. And again, when you go to elections, when they're making decisions on behalf of people, if they make a decision in a small group or even a big group says, I don't like that, but they get reelected, they think the other half of that or the other portion of that must have thought that was a good decision. So I think that we've got to go to elected officials, we've got to go to community groups, we've got to go to nonprofits, we've got to go to groups like Terrence's and like Dominic's, and to everybody's point, hold more of these style meetings. But I think that we're on the right path to getting there. I think it's a matter of, I don't know that you ever get to a consensus on these, and I hate to say it that way, that everybody walks out of the room and goes, that was a great deal. We joke about it in organized labor and in the union business that a good negotiation means everybody walks out of there upset. Everybody's mad about something. I left that on the table or we missed that. And the other side is like, we could have got more from them. So unfortunately, I don't know that there ever is a consensus agreement that everybody lives with and says, we all live with it, but then everybody's like, that's the best agreement we could get. I think sometimes you just get there and that's where you go.
That's a good point. I think that there's a difference between consensus and compromise, and that we've lost the art of compromising as a country due to the tearing of the social fabric, because some people feel like in order for me to win, you have to lose. And I think that's a lot of the times when we sit in meetings like this, where people become frustrated, irate, yelling and screaming, we're losing the ability to further engage. And then you have community disengagement. And then the projects go forward, and then the community is pissed. And then the community shows up and said, well, had I known about that meeting, we would have come. And so just thinking again to Ms. Teresa's point, because Baytown is much different than East Harris County. And so when I grew up, 30 plus years ago, community meant where you lived. So like in 89, 90, it was like, that was my community. I lived there. I went to that school, that high school. Just think about where we all grew up, the zip code. It was something that defined us. And so community, common unity, it was something that united us. Whereas to your point, today community could be the union. It could be activists. It could be industry. It could be port worker. It could be government employee. The definition of community has entrepreneur. It could mean so many different things to so many different people. And that's why we have to continue to learn the art and the dance of community engagement. Because I don't think that anyone would sit here today and say that if you ask 30% of Baytown, that people would then say that that's not enough. And so, but again, that's by somebody else's expectation of saying, well, they didn't do what they did. But hey, we've had 2 years of meetings and gotten consent. And that, again, is the whole idea of community engagement. It is the ongoing dialogue to sit here and to meet with people like you, meet with people like Dominic, meet people like you, myself, and bringing us together to share our lived experiences in these kinds of opportunities so that the community representative of voices, because many times we may agree on the same issue, but I'd imagine that there is some kind of issue that's going to take all 4 of us out. But our ability to still walk away, again, to your point, to say that that was a great, thoughtful dialogue, because maybe now you've opened my eyes to something that I didn't see before. And that's the outcomes of community engagement and thinking about how do we protect people in place and ensure that voices are heard. Because again, if these companies and organizations are submitting plans to say that this is how they're going to benefit the community, I would say that you would want some measure or modicum of community engagement, ongoing community engagement outside of a plan. Because if you think about it, we can sit here right now and type in ChatGPT and say community engagement plan for a DOE project. It took 30 seconds. And they've submitted a 30-second ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, you pick your AI of choice. We laugh, but y'all, that's true. But how do you know that that actually didn't happen? And that means that your community is again, that's already been disadvantaged, is then they're getting points to say that, hey, that the community wants this. And then at the end of the day, you all don't get anything that you actually wanted. And so again, I would be, as a community, I would be organizing the neighborhood association, elected officials, and letting people know that these things may not be in the best interest of community, and then thinking about how to stay organized and committed to the fight. Because a lot of times what I see is that that there is one passionate person from this side of the aisle or the community, and there's like no one with them. And they're up there holding the flag. We don't want this, not in my backyard. And like there's no one else there. But what happens if the majority of the community then shows up and says, that's the crazy person, we do want this. And so just thinking about how we learn to coexist and to continue to compromise and know that, that life is not about a sum zero game, that in order for you to win, I have to lose. I don't subscribe to that. And I would think that most people in the room don't subscribe to that. But just thinking about how do we use community engagement so that the community can get a win and the company can get a win, because the last thing we want is the company showing up to the community like the guy in the airport trying to offer $1,000 and the community's, running off because they're terrified.
I could be in this conversation all night because I got so much to ask all of you and talk about, but I do want to open it to the floor and see what kind of questions we got. So do we have a mic runner? We are bringing the mics because, one, we want to make sure your voice gets captured on the tape, so it is being recorded that way, literally recorded. But Climate Now is in the room, and they've been taking notes as well. So just so you know, we do have notes being taken. By point taken, we don't have them being projected, which is a community thing too, I know. But improvements always available. But please, ma'am.
I attend a lot of these, and this might be my favorite and and the best one I've been to. I appreciate the panel. I appreciate the people. I appreciate coming up. And so it does a combination of things that have been missed lately. I was at a meeting where it was nothing but tables, and so you circulated the tables, and then you can't hear the other people's comments, okay? So that's a lack when you can't hear other people's comments. To just circulate tables. I've been to where they just stand up and each area does a 5-minute presentation and there's no question and answer. It's just, here's what we did, period, and it's pushed. So this has opened up the dialogue, which is excellent. I mean, this format is really good. And it's to the DOE and the community involvement, but I think it goes further than that. So, I'm just seeing a solution of the panelists up there. You have an HR person, you have technical, you have different groups from the company seeking a permit or seeking to go forward, and you have a public forum where the community's out here, they can engage. I don't want to make an investment that I go to 7 of these meetings about something. I'll go to 3. I'll go to 1 to learn about what the major issues are, that someone intelligent tells me, hey, the technical guy said this, but you know what, they're going to do this. And so there comes that balance. Hey, technical guy, in the next meeting you ask, did they answer that? Are we okay with this scenario? Hey, HR person, you said that you're going to hire 400 people and they're construction guys. There's 400 people that are construction guys, but at the end of the day, you're only going to have 50 sitting in your plant. What do those people look like? And so there's an engagement, there's a back and forth and whatever. I don't want to invest 7 meetings. I don't. And with that said, Exxon wanted a permit, and the permit that they wanted, we asked for another public meeting, and they said no. And so TCEQ and Exxon say, no, don't have another permit meeting. So then they had a contested case hearing. 2 years later, I had party status and I'm writing closing arguments on something I don't even know. I don't want to know that much. You could have had your permit if you just would have told us in some basic language and made us comfortable, but you couldn't make us comfortable. And so we have these experts telling us, hey, you know what, this isn't going to be what you thought it was going to be. And then that's a fear factor on our part that makes it, hey, let's keep it up and let's understand it. I still don't understand it, but they still don't have their permit. Yeah. So if you just bring in the parties that can help us on both sides, the ones that are super intelligent and they are the scientists and they just break it down real simple. I can handle that. that tells me where that stuff goes into a well and whatever, I'm cool with it. And the rocks are absorbed. I mean, this whole thing took a couple of hours, but I'm walking away happy. And I think a lot of people are going to walk away happy today because this has been a very successful format to hear, exchange, and I'm hoping the DOE is relatively transparent that I'm even comfortable with what you guys told me. I don't need to know more than that, but I needed to know that much.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for comfort. Just make it that I can A, understand it pretty well, and then B, I'll go away happy. Hey, I don't want to come to
think
another one.
That's exactly what I was saying about, because in that case, no one won. Because at the end of the day, you may even want to have a job of one of those 400 jobs on that particular project. And so again, communicating to people, so I think a lot of times we communicate from our level of competence as opposed to speaking to the receiver's competence. Because even thinking about tonight, a lot of this, all of this panel, this event was offered in English only. And so thinking about Harris County and the large number of people who may not speak English, that also looks at community engagement of how are we thinking about it from, because I know you all had DEIA up there, but talking about language justice of how are we thinking about Vietnamese, thinking about Espanol and different things like that, of how are we engaging other communities who may not speak English as well.
Yeah, and we did send out bilingual requests for invitations. However, you have to have the right lists of who you're sending out to, right? And I don't think our lists are very robust for that side so that the Spanish-speaking communities are actually receiving it. So we're trying, but we don't have all of the recipient end, right? So we're talking in Spanish, but we're talking to the wrong audience. And so I think we're trying, and point taken on Vietnamese, we didn't push that far yet, but I know that's an issue out in this community. I do want to give a shout out because I appreciate your comments about what's working well here. And we did get a lot of advice from local community groups that were on an advisory council for us. And when we iterated with them and they helped us to improve it. So it's not all just DOE like, oh, we're so great. We're getting feedback from people that are helping us improve. And a big thanks to that planning committee for donating their time to help tonight be better than it might have otherwise been. There was someone else with their hand up. Randy, do you have a mic?
I do.
Perfect.
Thank you. So it's my understanding that the CBPs need to be drafted and submitted before approval of the funding. So that's a little bit, I guess, earlier today, some of the speakers were talking about the importance of engaging early in the process with community. But if there is no engagement before the CBP is formed, it's kind of difficult for that process to include community because by design it doesn't include it. So that's, I guess it's not really a question. That's like prefacing my question. So I guess that goes back to the trust issue, because I think that how do we address an issue like trust when from the perspective of people who've been working on these issues, quite actively and who are from the community, the risks aren't being spoken about in a very genuine and straightforward way. And so it seems like, how do we have a true productive conversation around CBPs or CBAs if we don't have the full scope of the risks and the full scope of the impact? And then, sorry, the other thing is, I think we also need to be realistic of how we invest in outreach, because Pasadena is majority Spanish speaking, right? And so, yeah, how do we get those lists? And maybe it's paying for them. I don't know, maybe it's getting contractors. But if these are $100 billion projects, it deserves some financial investment and time investment that's realistic of what is the reality of that community and how they engage.
So, Dominic, I know you have something to say and I want you to say it, but I'm going to invite Kelly to come back up because I did promise that you would be a part of the Q&A for this part. So if you want to come up, Kelly. Dominic, I want you to say what you were going to say that was following with what Randy said. I have some answers to your comments in there or some support of that. I don't necessarily want to be, I'm supposed to be the moderator, not the answer questioner, or reverse that. But Kelly might want to say that. And then I know there was maybe some other questions. So first, Dominic, please.
Yeah, no, to your point and both of your all's comments, actually, this meeting might seem like we got all of what we needed to get out, but the reality is this is a really industry heavy perspective. I have I can give a whole other 30-minute hour presentation on the actual risks, on some of the actual funding mechanisms that are publicly based but privatized, and so all this stuff. So what I worry about these engagement processes, and when we kind of are too sugarcoaty over like what we accomplish here, is we're actually working a little bit towards manufacturing consent versus really talking about what the risks are. We haven't even talked about, we talked about a pipeline bursting in Mississippi, but we just heard, from the industry perspective, right? From the DOE perspective and from agencies, we did not hear from the communities that had to go through that, right? We're not hearing also, one thing we haven't really touched on is the cumulative impact, right? When we're talking about carbon capture safety, we're kind of viewing it in a vacuum, but we in this area know that we live next to oil and gas, we live next to ammonia plants, petrochemicals, these things don't live in a vacuum. And we're in the very end of the programming where we're already kind of behind, and we're trying to have to rush through this conversation. So again, that's not to say that what we were able to discuss wasn't fruitful, but this is just maybe the front page cover, right? We need to be able to go real deep into what the risks are so that we don't manufacture consent even on accident. And then to the outreach program, part of the issue is we live in a huge state. We live in a huge diverse region. There's not a one size fits all for recruitment. And so we need to be really cognizant of that.
So Kelly, thank you, Dominic. And so Kelly, the reason I asked you to come back up was, one, I said I would, but two, also, to Randy's point, I was wondering if you could dig a little bit or just explain a little bit the FOA process, and just kind of what happens kind of in the application period. What is the FOA itself? What is a FOA? What's that application period? And kind of just explain that community engagement opportunity at the different stages of the life of a project. Kind of some of us have seen that life of a bill, cartoons sitting on Capitol Hill kind of a thing. Well, this is like a life of a DOE project, I don't know if you can kind of just give just as brief as you can, just kind of opportunity for community engagement in that.
Yes, perfect. Okay, getting started here. So we do have this, an FAQ about funding opportunity announcements, which are, they're essentially grants to conduct research where there are criteria that's outlined for the different aspects of the project. Depending on the specific stage of the project, what level, for example, the carbon safe switch phase they're applying to, there are different requirements for engagement. And we have a set of resources about what that should look like, what should go into those plans. And before we release a FOA, we also release an RFI, which is an opportunity to get feedback of what should go into that. That said, specifically in what we're asking for when we get those initial plans is we want to see the engagement that has already been conducted to date. So there is an expectation that engagement has happened to some extent. It could be just initial engagement with those specific activities of how they're going to improve their stakeholder analysis, the social characterization. When I say early, sometimes I'm also talking about the early in the R&D phase. So Gilly mentioned paper studies, pre-feasibility, feed studies, all of this in advance of even site characterization or drilling the stratigraphic test wells way before construction. Those R&D phases require engagement and analysis, needs assessments, engagement connecting with communities where there's opportunities for feedback early in that process. And ideally that's when some of the more firm decisions about what materials are used can be adjusted or informed by different concerns. We have one example of a project in California where there are water quantity and quality issues for a place that was hosting a natural gas facility and a carbon capture facility. Instead of using a water cooling system, they decided to use an air cooling system to avoid the water impacts or concerns. And so that's one example how we want to see engagement early in the process where it can inform some of those meaningful decisions of what the actual technology and infrastructure will look like.
Now, the one.
Did I get to?
No, I think you did. The only caveat I want to give is that there's a lot of folks in here with nonprofits, right? And you're probably really used to responding to an RFI, or excuse me, an RFP, like request for proposal or whatever. And that's kind of like what DOE's FOA is, or FOA, or funding opportunity announcement. It's basically an RFP, okay? And so the one thing I want to say in there is that it's competitive, right? So everybody's applying to get that funding. And so the community engagement is one aspect of what we are scoring that application on. It doesn't mean like you have to have it or your entire project gets kicked out. It means if you didn't have it, you get scored lower, but there's a chance that you could still move ahead without having done that piece because your application overall scored high. And so that's the only thing I just kind of want to make sure is clear, that that's what we're looking for and what we hope to see. But if it's not there, it's not necessarily like you're disqualified and thrown out. You know, it's a competitive process. So if your application over a whole is still pretty strong, you might still go forward without something like that. And I know, Randy, you had something to add.
Because I think you made an excellent point, and I want to just give you a real world example. And this is where my it's not so good that I don't live here and I'm talking about things going on in Texas, but my experience around the country is probably helpful in this case. So just to give you an idea of when we talk about community benefit plans and, well, if these things are already approved, why are they going forward? I think one of the gentlemen earlier mentioned that they're still in negotiations on some of these things. A project in Nebraska, Monolith, DOE project, was preliminarily chosen and funded by the DOE to get funding and approval to go forward. Pardon my language, had a shit community benefit plan. Did not consider any of the resident, I say none, didn't reach out to the Native American community. There was a ton of outreach that they had not done. We got involved, and I know, again, we're very lucky. We've got folks that can do this, and we've got the ability to get involved. But this is where some of these connections, to your point about these are done deals, it's not a done deal. That thing did not get funded. The community benefit plan they were flat told, this is not going to go forward with this plan. We are not approving the loan. It's basically a zero, it's basically funding. We're not giving you the funding with this plan in place. They reworked the plan, re-engaged the community. We've spent a significant amount of time up there through our entities and others in developing a real and a good community benefit plan that turned into a community benefit agreement, and that project has been funded. So they were told, no, your project is dead, gone, done. There's significant investments from industry to do these things because they've already made significant investments. So there's a real incentive if you can get involved at that level and show the decision makers around that this is not good enough, for these companies to come back and rework the plan and rework it and come to with a real agreement. So that is available. It's just, it takes some time, it takes some work, and it takes some resources.
I was going to piggyback onto what you were saying, that thinking about that this is our tax dollars at work and making sure that they're doing the best interest of the people in the country. But thinking about, to Teresa's point, of fighting back or pushing back, getting to that idea of compromise to say, hey, this can be better, because these projects takes years to implement, right? And then the gentleman in the back talked about community engagement every step of the way. So I would be thinking as a community to go into to their website and look at every group or project and however much money that's on there, and then thinking about how do I get in contact with that project manager, that funder, lead person, and then start having engaging conversations with them and just kind of be that fly or that bee, however you want to be, but really thinking about how do you engage them and letting them know that you're going to get the community involved and start writing letters to DOE to do what you said, or even to get the project pulled or canceled. So this is, the government's attempt to really say that they're serious about community engagement. I would hold everybody's feet to the fire, the government, by saying, you said that you would engage us. Well, who did you engage? But then you also may find yourself being on some kind of community advisory panel and asking for your input to make that process better. And even to Irandi's point, DOE, you all came in and did this project with a local advisory panel. So even with the best of intentions, that always doesn't mean that things are going to be 100% perfect. But at the end of the day, I look at it, is it better to be perfect or is it better to make progress? And so thinking about that to where it doesn't have to be one or the other, because everyone's coming to this with, all of the new opportunities, but there's an inherent amount of risk. And this understanding that we don't all have it together, and I don't think anyone expects the government to have it together, and the government doesn't expect the community to have it together. But again, we can get it together when all sides come together in good faith and trust the process, even if you don't trust each other.
Well, on that note, I want to ask our audience to say thank you to our panel and close it here. All right, I'll give it back to Emmanuel.
Okay, I just want to quickly say thank you to everybody for being a part of the discussion. And as we said in the beginning, we know that there's still much more to discuss, and so we look forward to the follow-up. I will say too, we are past the closing time on the venue, and there are folks who are working here who can't get home until we do. So I'm going to ask us all to, try to make the connections that you can as well as possible on our way out. Thank you, everyone.